What's going on, y'all? Welcome back for another The Film Hang. This is our Sunday Super Bowl special. We're super excited to be able to come back each week to make these possible. If you're watching from the Filmmakers Academy side, please make sure to drop some comments, follow along. Chris has been working on a really awesome presentation because tonight we were talking about the Super Bowl of Best Pictures, potentially the most controversial Best Picture winner from 1978, the epic, the one and only Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter. Chris, how you doing, man? I know that you're super stoked to be able to talk to this.
I'm super excited, man. It's been a good week. I've really enjoyed this week. It's been great. I went to a thing the other day, which some of the viewers might want to hear about, which is I went to a DGA thing where all of the Oscar-nominated directors were, and it was before the DGA Awards. It was kind of like they showed a few clips from their films, and then they asked them questions, which was some really insightful stuff, to be honest. And it was really nice to see how these new cohorts of directors, also mixed with some of the old directors like Guillermo del Toro and, experienced heads like P.T. Anderson, experienced the set and also how they do different bits of directing work. And it was fascinating. I mean, like a good example is this. So it was Josh Safdie, it was Ryan Coogler, it was Chloe Zhao, it was Guillermo del Toro, and it was P.T. Anderson. So literally the top five directors from the movies this year. And,
That's awesome.
And the guy asked, here's a cool question that they asked Sweeney, just to kind of get us into this. This was a really cool question that the guy asked. He said, what do you do on your way to set? Right? And he asked that of all five directors. And it was really interesting to hear the different answers. Because Coogler says that he's with his wife, who's also his producer, Zizzy, I think her name is, and they listen to really loud music so that everybody on set knows that they're arriving. So they've got really loud albums going on. And then Chloe Zhao's she's kind of very sort of about the earth and about nature and kind of hippie-ish, I suppose you'd call her. I don't know if it's derogatory that, but yeah, she's very hippie-ish.
She's kind of like a maternal figure, very motherly.
Yeah, she said she listened. She said she'd read the astrology for that day. She said she was big time into that. And then she said another thing she did, which was really interesting, was she talked about them all keeping dream journals. She said that her and Jesse would swap dreams in the morning, her and Jesse Buckley, and they would basically discuss each other's dreams. You know what I mean? Which was she said it even informed what the film they were making. You know what I mean? They would inform that day's filming, effectively. Some of the things they'd been dreaming about. And she also said she let Paul Mescal and Jesse Buckley pick a set list for how they were feeling that day on the day of their big soliloquy or anything like that. So they could really kind of get themselves in the zone. And they played that for the whole crew. So the crew could kind of get into the same headspace as the actors. And I thought, that's a really cool idea. You know what I mean? Letting your actors come up with a playlist for their day's filming, their important bits. It was really I thought that was a great idea.
We were talking about that in office hours, and for those that are joining this for the first time, the Film Hang, this is what it's all about. We're going to be talking about movies and what we've experienced in the movie tonight being The Deer Hunter, but we also do these live events. If you're a part of Filmmakers Academy or don't know what Filmmakers Academy is, it's an online educational platform, and we hold office hours, which some of the people watching from the FA platform attend office hours every week. And it's these open calls where sometimes we have a focus, a topic, like, for example, we're talking about marketing. But the one prior to Loop Full Circle was about control versus collaboration. And we talked about Chloe Zhao and the different types of the different ways filmmakers, more specifically the directors, lead their productions, and to Chloe Zhao, this very motherly figure. And you can see it in the BTS and the way that, she would bring in music to be able to break a little bit of levity into what is a very sad story, and I think she does a great job of being that kind of leader that you can lean on. And then there's this Kubrick types who we talked about in the last session, and he was this controlling but enabled the best out of the crew that he had, and everyone loved that who worked with him. And that's the fascinating thing of being a director or a leader. There's so many ways to be able to essentially lead your production, you know?
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating because it does show in the films that they make. You know what I mean? It really does. You can tell from Ryan Coogler how everything around him is related to music, you know, and his love of music. If you watch Sinners, it's literally the primary focus of Sinners. And one of the things they did was they showed that whole the clip that's pretty much got him nominated, which is spectacular. And it's the bit when he's playing the guitar and it goes around the room and you see all the different eras of music, and you've got like a DJ on the decks. It's just brilliant, you know. And they talked about that. I thought it was a really fascinating chat, and it was something that certainly got me into this. And yeah, I thought we could start with it was interesting, you know.
Yeah, that's super. No, go
Yeah,
for
I
it.
mean, Josh Safdie said something which was really fascinating. He said that he always had pink slips in his pocket on their way to Marty Supreme, on their way to set. He always had pink slips in his pocket, and he called them the JFKs. This is a bad joke, but he said the JFKs, it's basically the shots that nobody saw coming. And he basically meant these pink slips are the shots that I'm going to add in at certain points during the day or at the end of the day if we've got time to do them. So he's written these different shots down and he puts them in his pocket, and that's his thing that he does on the way to setting them on. I thought that was fascinating too. Yeah, they were all brilliant to listen to. It was inspiring.
Yeah, that's the amazing part of living in Los Angeles, being able to have these opportunities to hear these filmmakers speak to their work, their artistry. And that's what gets me so excited about tonight, you know, talking about this director, Michael Cimino, who is a larger than life figure. And I always use the example of he very much embodied the journey of Icarus, someone so big and so passionate and so brilliant at his job, but he flew too close to the sun. And we'll definitely be talking about that. And I know, Chris, you've put a lot together to be able to speak to this journey. But I know for myself, The Deer Hunter, I've rewatched it now 2.5 times leading into this session. And growing up in Pennsylvania, especially Western Pennsylvania, where there was the steel mills, and I got to be around that environment. It was super fascinating because I, of course, wasn't born in the late 70s, you know, when they shot this film, but I love their way of showing the blue collar, like working class in Western Pennsylvania, Ohio area. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
super excited for this one.
I'm excited to hear what you've got to say about it as well, because, you know, you're actually coming from the area. You've got a knowledge that I don't have of it. So that'll really add something to it, I think, as we can go through. You can tell me about what it's like there now, you know what I mean? And the culture and the people over there too. I think that you know a lot more about that than I do. So yeah, let's dive into it. Let's do some stuff on this. Can you see my screen, Brendan, or do I need to share it?
I think it would be good to share it if you want to clean up the screen. I
I'm
think,
clicking
yeah.
share, but it ain't letting me share, which is a shame. Oh, there
Oh
we
no, you were sharing your screen.
go. Okay,
So you were good there. Yeah.
excellent. All right, let me find it now then. Hold up.
And thanks to everybody that's tuning in from the FA platform. I see Andrew, Bruce, Tom. Appreciate you guys hopping in after the Super Bowl to be able to talk about this movie. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, and it's a shame. I'm looking at the score now, 29-13. It's it looks like I'm wearing the wrong team's jersey, but there we go, Brendan, you know. All right, so the Deer Hunter, yeah. Brendan and I have just already said Michael Cimino is one of the most, he's got such crazy stories. And if you ever type him in on YouTube, you'll see this guy who sits there with a cigarette and he just tells these stories about being on set. But he really was this ambitious filmmaker. And we're going to talk about him in a moment after this introduction, where I tell you a little bit about the film. Then we'll talk a little bit about the cast and crew, who was on board. One of the people is one of the legendary cinematographers, a guy named Vilmos Zsigmond. And he actually came down to visit Shane and what was it? Shane's Inner Circle at that point. So it was sort of like just before Hurlbut Academy, just before Filmmakers Academy. Vilmos actually paid a visit to set, so he knows some of the people who actually work with our team, which was cool. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what I'm calling Tropic Thunder, the stories from the set. And these are really like cool stories about what happened behind the scenes. And they're mad. If you've seen our Instagram, you know, there's certain stories from the set of this that really, they should never happen on a film set, but they did. And it was that time when these crazy filmmakers went off to Thailand to make this film. And I would say that Tropic Thunder is based a little bit on this. You know what I mean? So, yeah, get ready for that bit. And then finally, we'll go shot for shot. Brendan and I are going to look through all the different shots that we love from this film. We'll talk about them. We might talk a little bit about Vilmos's cinematography. And talk about where they were shot, talk about the story behind the shot. So everything that we can do on that bit. And then, we'll talk about its impact and how it shaped Vietnam and Vietnam War stories and everything like that, because that's a fascinating bit too. So here we go. Here's the introduction, Brendan. First of all, the script itself, all right? This story started out as The Man Who Came to Play. It wasn't called The Deer Hunter originally. This was the script, all right? And it was bought by the record company EMI. So in 1968, this record company EMI that had done Beatles recordings, they recorded all these different massive music stars, they decided to set up a film division, okay, and put their money into films. And they got these two producers on board called Barry Spikings and Michael Dealey. And those two guys went out and found spec scripts that they thought would be cool to be made. And they bought this one for $19,000. It was called The Man Who Came to Play. And it was pretty much about a guy who goes to Vegas to play Russian roulette. Okay, he's gone to Vegas a bunch of times and he's played cards, and he's played all these things, and he's lost that kind of excitement, that hunger for betting and gambling and going to Vegas. And then somebody introduces him to Russian roulette and the underground and what's, more interesting than just gambling. And this is what it was about. So this was the screenplay that they bought, and they wanted to find a director to direct it. And the director that they brought in was this guy, Michael Cimino, a guy that Brendan and I worship. And in fact, I think our friendship was started talking about Michael Cimino and The Deer Hunter because we both loved this film so much. And the first time I saw this film, I just wanted to know more about it. I think it's one of the first films that I've bought on DVD and gone, I need to watch all of the director's commentary of it and all of the different videos of Cimino being interviewed, because he was just a fascinating character. And he started off actually on New York as a commercial director, and he made these different ones. I think he made a Pepsi commercial. I think he made commercials for different airways and stuff, and that's what this one is, and it's called Fly the Friendly Skies, right? I'll only play a little bit of it because it's a little bit crazy, but this is what Michael Cimino started off doing in sort of the mid-60s.
Can't you take me along?
But honey, it's business. It's just a week. Be back before you know it.
If you love me, take me along. If you love me, take me along.
I won't be a little cutie, but the office is my duty.
So you kind of get the gist, all right? I don't need to play the whole thing, but you get the gist. It's kind of a little bit sexist, I suppose. I suppose it's very sexist. And this is what the kind of stuff he was making. But one of the things that you should have seen there was it's a little bit like a men's only club if you're flying's only for men. But he made this, it was like TV's Mad Men era. And a lot of the frames and a lot of the action use these kind of one-point perspectives, all right? And he incorporates lots of dolly shots, lots of zooms to make it seem very kinetic. And you're going to see that across much of his work, because this guy, that's his style. And he does other things that are very kind of Americana-led, lots of American-based things, lots of American colors in there. And you're going to see that in The Deer Hunter too. So this is how he started off. He started off, having been a commercial director, he moves to LA because he didn't want to make those kind of semi-sexist sort of ads anymore. He wanted to make something different. So he wanted to be a screenwriter. And in 1971, he comes to LA and he writes this movie that is another favorite of mine that's called Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, starring Clint Eastwood. Brendan, have you seen Thunderbolt and Lightfoot?
I love Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. That was actually the first movie that I've seen by him. I think before I saw The Deer Hunter, which growing up, a lot of people watched The Deer Hunter. That was a commonly talked about film, just being in Western Pennsylvania. But I think
Yeah.
because there was a period where my father and I watched every Clint Eastwood movie, starting from his earliest spaghetti Western roots through like the rest of his career. And this was one. And I didn't realize at the time, I really didn't start thinking of Michael Cimino till with more depth until film school when I saw The Deer
Mm.
Hunter. Then I went back and revisited Thunderbolt Lightfoot because that's when they just did a 4K re-release of that movie. And it's great. It's an awesome first film. And what's really awesome about Cimino, especially in his early roots of being this commercial director who worked on Saks Fifth Ave and did all of this stuff. What's interesting about Cimino is whilst doing that, he also studied things like ballet and would go to ballet classes to be able to understand blocking and movement and all of this stuff. And you see that in his very first film. And I was watching, I think you sent this to me, that interview about this movie, just how even Clint Eastwood said how good of an eye he had as a director. And that's what I love about this first film.
Yeah, I mean, it says it there. Clint Eastwood was going to direct this, all right? He got the script that was obviously Cimino's script, and he was going to direct it. And then he had an hour-long meeting with Michael Cimino. And in that hour, Cimino had so much confidence, so much ambition. He knew exactly how he was going to shoot stuff. And Eastwood gave up the reins on this film to a 39-year-old guy who had only ever directed commercials. It's pretty unbelievable. But we'll see. As he goes on in his career, Cimino just had this way about him of being able to convince people to let him do stuff. And like you've said, he did become the Icarus. He flew too close to the sun. He asked for so much. Eventually, there was going to come a point where he might not be able to deliver. And that's what we've probably seen happen. It's heartbreaking because, like, I'm glad that there's a filmmaker out there who did this, who was able to go to the studio and convince them of different things. And this is another thing. After Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and after the success of it, he comes back to The Man Who Came to Play, right? And he basically said to the studio, I can do it, but it's going to need massive changes, all right? Like huge. We're going to have to do a whole rewrite with only a couple of things kept in there. And the only thing he kept in was the Russian roulette scenes because he thought that they were cool. They gave this real kind of edge and trauma and fear and everything that you really needed in a film, he thought was the Russian roulette scene. Now, he decided to change the whole script from The Man Who Came to Play, The Gambler, all this kind of stuff. And he brought this guy called Derek Washburn in, who he'd written another movie called Silent Running in, which I've never seen, but I've always kind of wanted to see. So I'm going to put that on my list. Excuse me. But Derek Washburn wrote this movie, and then he brought him in and said, look, let's make this movie that's going to be about working class men. So let's set it somewhere where we've got working class blue collar workers, Pennsylvania. All right. And then let's set it in the Vietnam War. They're just about to go off to the Vietnam War. Let's throw in lots more stronger language. Let's throw in, lots, make it as realistic as possible in that respect. And let's put some violence in there. And yeah, as he said, keep the Russian roulette. And this movie, The Man That Came to Play, this screenplay became The Deer Hunter. And that's where we're up to right now. So writing it was unbelievable. Now, this is another thing that was also unbelievable. And as I said, Cimino had this way of sort of like bringing people on board, right? This is a line from the publicist of the movie, The Deer Hunter, right? That was right after the New York Times came out, right? Was Michael told the effing New York Times he was a medic in the Green Berets. That is a direct quote. And that's what he did, so that they wouldn't question him on his knowledge of Vietnam, or so that he could get this movie made even. He told people that he was a medic in the Green Berets, and he wasn't actually a medic in the Green Berets at all. He wasn't actually attached to Special Forces or anything like that. He actually joined the army 6 years earlier, and he was never a Green Beret. So he told these stories to try and help him to get this movie done. And here's another direct quote, which is another one of my favorites, which was, he was no more a medic in the Green Berets than I'm a rutabaga, which I believe is an American sort of vegetable. Am I right, Brendan? A rutabaga.
I believe so. And this is going to be like a common through line with Michael Cimino is he was the ultimate opportunist in the way, again, he was the man who flew too close to the sun. He was an amazing filmmaker who sees the moment. And I know you'll speak a little bit about his like collaborating partner, Joanna Corelli. But these
Yeah.
two made stuff happen and always found a way. And I don't quite know what type of, like, if Cimino grew up in any sort of affluence. Do you know what his like background was before even this?
Only like what you've said. He used to go to ballet things, but he studied painting and architecture at university.
Yeah.
So you actually see a lot of that. And he was a born artist. You can see that he had an eye for this kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know anything other than that about his history. And that's a shame, really, because as I said, he seemed to come from absolutely nowhere. And
Yeah.
you know, made these unbelievable films. And as I said, he took that one from what was going to be like a buddy cop movie, it seems like. I mean, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot was effectively like a, what was it, like a kind of comedy heist in a way. Jeff Bridges, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, he's gone on to make, this was like his next step, I suppose, and it was a lot more gritty. And the other thing is, as I said, he came in when Vietnam at that point, I mean, when did I think that the Americans pulled out of Vietnam in sort of like early 70s. It might even have been 1970, all right? And at this moment, yeah, in fact, there it is, 1975, right? Vietnam was a massive taboo topic. We're only a couple of years outside of the Vietnam War, okay? So covering this conflict is really kind of dangerous ground. And for Michael Cimino to walk in on a meeting that was about gambling and about going to Vegas, called The Man Who Came to Play, and to literally say, we're going to change it, we're going to make it about Vietnam, is a guy that's going to make his movie, whether it's this script or not. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's anything to do with this script other than the Russian roulette theme. Everything it was about, you know, we had this idea of them going off to Vietnam, them going to Vietnam, and then afterwards, what it did to them and the impact that it'd have. And it had this huge anti-war sentiment to it, this movie. And as I said, like at that time, it could have been received one or two ways. You know what I mean? The conflict was seen as a failure. You know, we pulled out of Vietnam, Saigon fell. It was an awful time, really. People were coming back from war scarred. We have PTSD and everything. But what was unbelievable was, you know, as I said, it didn't deter Cimino from going telling this story. And it was received the way it was received. You know, it was something that everybody else was avoiding at the time. And it took an artist like this to be able to show it in the way he did. And these guys as well, his cast and his crew. You know, Brendan, you know, you've just talked about his creative partners. Well, right here, you know, the people that were in front of the camera and the people behind the camera were some pretty stunning people. I mean, if you've seen any of the stuff that we've talked about in any of our Instagram posts, we've talked about the editor in there. We've talked a little bit about Vilmos Zsigmond, and these actors are absolutely unbelievable. I mean, originally it was going to be that the role of Michael, that was eventually played by Robert De Niro here, right? That was originally going to be played by Roy Schneider. That was originally going to be played by the guy who is in Jaws, all right? One of my favorite films. They were going to put him in as Michael, all right? And he left production after a couple of weeks. Now, some are saying that it's creative differences. Others are saying it's pay. But either way, he was going to be in it, and he left it to do, you ready for this, Brendan? Jaws 2. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water.
I'm glad that it's De Niro. Not that I don't love him as an actor. I think he could have added his own spin on it, but I really love the cast that ultimately ended up in the movie. I think that it's perfect casting across the board for this film.
You're right. You're right. And this is De Niro fresh off of what, I mean, he did Taxi Driver just around about this time. You know what I mean? So this is De Niro in a fairly fresh time. And one of the craziest... Yeah, go on.
Oh, no, something that I wanted to add in, and Bruce was actually saying this just for timeline, that 1973 was actually with the Paris Accord, and the war continued until 1975 when Saigon fell. But you know what? It's interesting because you were talking about this right before. There really was not a lot of Vietnam movies that came out before this film. Like, to put it in order, like Apocalypse Now did not come out until the year later. We had movies like Platoon did not come out until the 80s, along with Full Metal Jacket. It was really Cimino in so many ways that led this to then there being a flurry of films that focused on Vietnam to follow suit. But there really wasn't. You're so right how close it was to 1975 as this, like, the war discontinued. I mean, that's pretty to start production of this film. And then, like, they were shooting, what, a year after it discontinued, maybe
when Phantoms was probably still a bit raw, You know what I mean? Well, very raw. You know, but for Cimino, Vietnam is a context. It's not the subject. Yeah, you know, he uses it as something to shape his characters, really. It doesn't become the subject matter too much in that respect. But he was also being blunt about why wars are fought. You know, this is what I love about Cimino. With this film, he's basically, and by placing these guys in Pennsylvania, like you were saying, he's making the sentiment that working people fight wars, working people die in them, and it's working people who have to live with the consequences long after the war's ended. You know what I mean? He is showing you what happens to working people when it comes to war, because the rich people don't have to deal with any of it, and we don't see any of those at all. You know what I mean? It's these working people who have to go off, and it's not necessarily a political argument. As I said, it's more of an observation by Cimino about class and the consequences that, you know, impact upon those classes.
I would say a really good companion piece to this movie, if no one has ever seen Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line, I think these films do a really good job of, and Bruce even said it in the comments here, what's interesting, even though this film has the backdrop of war, and like you said, is more a vessel to dissect these characters, war is a very small part of the actual runtime of The Deer Hunter. It does not take up immense amount of, and I would highly recommend, if you've never seen this movie, to go and see different war, because it's World War II, but definitely go see The Thin Red Line, because both of these films, what they do so well in their own anti-war kind of capacity is the dissection of the soldier and the war that's fought outside of the war itself, or the battle itself. And Terrence Malick, he did such an awesome job being able to craft that. Some people don't love it. This is kind of where Terrence Malick slowly starts to evolve his style, and that's where you see it the first time. But highly recommend watching both of those films together.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. I mean, there's a few that are really good as well from this era I'd talk about as well. I mean, Born on the 4th of July is a great one with Tom Cruise in it that's lesser known. You know, I mean, there's some great ones. But yeah, we'll get into that a bit later on. You know, like going back to cast, Robert De Niro, we talked about it. He was the guy, you know what I mean? And like, I've put it up in here, this little picture here is, that is De Niro, for those people who don't know, and a lot of people do, I know. But Robert De Niro, when he did Taxi Driver, he went method. He became a taxi driver for like, you know, several months to get himself into the zone and to talk to, you know, clientele and stuff like that, and really kind of get himself into this place where he knew what it was like to be a taxi driver. He did the same on this. For 9 months, he went and operated a blast furnace as a steel worker, and he insisted that everybody called him Bob. And half the people, obviously, because they've not seen Taxi Driver or whatever, they didn't know it was him. He wasn't even recognized, and this is a guy who won an Oscar. You know what I mean? So he could go and do this, and I think that's the beautiful thing about Robert De Niro. You know, if you look back at all of his films, he really went into them. You know what I mean? And I think that's what makes it. I can't imagine anybody else playing Michael in this film. You know, Robert De Niro really did kind of embody the alpha male in that. You know what I mean? And we'll see as it goes on, Brendan. You know, one of my favorite things about the character of Michael, played by De Niro, is like when he goes home and the fact he has to hold all of this in, and we never really see him break until the John Cazale confrontation scene. It's such spectacular acting. You know, even when I'd say in the wedding scene, there's a point where we have sort of De Niro just throwing a look to Meryl Streep's Linda, and it's just a look. There's no conversation, there's no talking, everything, all the sound is diegetic around him, and you just have these looks, and being able to convey that look, I think he's very special in an actor, and I love that about De Niro in this film.
And I want to even speak to where he was in his career, because this was at a particular time where I would say most people would argue 1970s, and this movie came out late 1970s, one of the best runs of cinema that we've probably ever had. And the way that directors were operating at this time, and not only directors, actors. I was looking at his filmography and what he acted in leading up to this movie and then right after. I mean, this guy in the 70s, and he did work before the 70s, nothing quite as big as this. He popped off, of course, with Mean Streets, Scorsese's early feature film, which he was on. Then went on to do The Godfather Part 2, which that honestly, in my opinion, and this is a whole separate, you know, the film hang, could potentially be better than the first one. his role in that film is amazing. Then to do Taxi Driver, another, like you said, Scorsese operating on a completely other level. Then went on to do Bernardo Bertolucci's 1900, which is also like in a crazy movie. And then from there he did, and it's really interesting because I do think the late 70s as we enter into the like early 80s, it's really important as you kind of perceive this time period of filmmaking. It was directorial excess. And that's when Scorsese, batting so high off the heels of Taxi Driver, they do New York, New York, which critically got panned at the time of release. And that was like Scorsese. Yeah. People did not love it. So the next film he came back with, and De Niro batting at his like highest, honestly, 2 films after this too, The Deer Hunter, which is crazy. Then he went on for the next year or 2 years later had Raging Bull come out. Like, what a run. What a run. And the King of Comedy.
And oh my God, Rupert Pupkin.
Yeah.
Oh, mate. He's an exceptional actor. Yeah, and as I said, like at that same time as he was doing all that, he was somehow at certain points over the next 9 months operating a blast furnace as a steel worker, so he could get used to it in this. So yeah, pretty outstanding for your lead actor. And then next to him and opposite him and everything like that is Nick, played by Christopher Walken. Right now, here's the crazy thing: Jeff Bridges, because Jeff Bridges was in Thunderbolt and Lightfoot and had worked with Cimino previously, he was lined up to be Nick. All right, but one thing is, Cimino apparently saw Christopher Walken read for it, and he said his eyes could show haunted as well as, you know, love and everything like this. So he cast him on his eyes. Another one of these directors who casts on the eyes, I believe, is Guillermo del Toro, because he was talking about it the other day. And it's this thing of looking into his eyes. He said he could show this haunted look, which you can see in this top corner here. But also, he could show this kind of loving face and everything like that you can see down here. So this character able to show 2 things just through the eyes. And this is the wildest thing. De Niro wasn't the only one who was being a method actor. Christopher Walken went out, and to get this kind of emaciated look that the soldiers had when they'd been in the Thai prison, in the Vietnamese prison, right, that was shot in Thailand, he got this withdrawn sort of hollow look by eating nothing but rice and bananas and drinking nothing but water, and he lost, stones upon stones of weight. And you can see it right here, in this sort of medical scene, he'd done that for the role and lost so much weight. And we actually hear stories about people doing this for Cimino, and Cimino getting them to wear all the same clothes throughout all the Vietnam bits and stuff so that they had the smell and everything. Just crazy things that they did in order to be on set. Meryl Streep was in it too. Meryl Streep was not a big actress at this time. This is actually her big sort of debut. And she was connected to De Niro through acting circles in New York. He'd seen her in a stage production called The Cherry Orchard. Famous play. Here's a picture of her in it. And then he was the one who recommended to Cimino that she play Linda. And actually, she didn't have hardly any lines in the play. They didn't, because she says in an interview, they didn't know how to write for women. Apparently, this is a very machismo movie. They didn't know what lines to give her. So Cimino basically told her to create or shape her own dialogue for each scene. So when you have the scenes that she's in, if you notice, she doesn't actually say an awful lot, but those lines that she says are written by her. She's just kind of reacting to anything that De Niro's throwing at her in a lot of the scenes. And just to speak to like Meryl Streep, yeah, she only had 4 credits before this, and this is still one of my favorite performances of hers. Like to this day, like. She's done a lot of amazing other films after this, of course, but speaking to the caliber of actor that was able to go, her first credited role, at least on IMDb, was 1976, to then to be able to have this movie release in 1978 with such a like stage presence or screen presence. It's very incredible. It's bonkers. I mean, like her first bit in the film is her going up to an alcoholic, abusive father. And she doesn't say anything, you know what I mean? She literally goes in and gives this, whatever it is, a 3.5 minute performance. It's amazing. Next to another one, the one who plays Stevie, who ends up in hospital without any legs, sadly, right? Stevie was played by John Savage, and he he'd not been in an awful lot. Since then, he's done Do the Right Thing. You might have seen him in Godfather Part 3, and also what Brendan just mentioned there in 1998, The Thin Red Line, Terry Malick. So John Savage was also quite the newcomer, and I think sadly overlooked. I don't think he got any noms for this. You might be wrong on that. You might have to show me, Brendan, but I think that Christopher Walken, obviously for his performance, kind of overshadowed John Savage. But I mean, like, again, it's such an amazing ensemble cast. You know what I mean? You've got John Cazale in here, who had been in 4 previous Oscar nominees, Best Picture nominees. You know, you've got Robert De Niro, you've got Chris Walken, and then John Savage is here. You know, like, it is a phenomenal lineup. And this guy, as I said, making his debut, it's a mesmerizing performance. You know, next to him was this guy, Chuck Aspragan. Chuck wasn't an actor. He was the foreman at the steelworks that De Niro got some days at, that Cimino visited during pre-production. He was a foreman. He'd never acted before, but they really liked the way that he was with the other workers, the way that he had this camaraderie with him, the way that he was kind of like the father figure. So they cast him as the role of Axel in this movie. And I think that, you know, that's such a beautiful thing. He was amazing in it. He really did act like, you know, when we get to it, this kind of father figure. Oh, I haven't got a picture of him all together yet. But when we see it, you know, he really is always around him, putting his arms around him, hugging them all. He doesn't go off to Vietnam. But yeah, Chuck Aspragan, phenomenal actor. I'm not sure if he's done anything since, but yeah, this was his first ever role from being a foreman in the steelworks. And finally, as I said, John Cazale is a guy that this was very sadly his last film. And he was filming it when he had terminal lung cancer and had weeks to live, weeks, to the point where they said, right, we'll film all of his scenes first, just in case. You know, the studio actually said that he was uninsurable. And there's a story that the studio told Michael Cimino, you best have a rewrite for if he dies during filming. And Cimino said, if he's not playing the role, I'm not being involved in it anymore. That's how much he cared about John Cazale. And De Niro himself even put the money up for John Cazale's insurance. So incredibly, you know, if you think when they're making this film, that's incredible, respectful and family-orientated things to do, you know, and you can see that this meant an awful lot to have John Cazale involved. And he never actually saw the finished film. He died before it was released, sadly. And it was his 5th and final film. You know, all 5 of his films were nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, which is like, I don't think there's any director in the world who's had that kind of role, that every one of their films was nominated for Best Picture. It's quite the run, you know.
Wasn't it like I'm pretty sure he passed away shortly after production wrapped, like principal photography wrapped. I want to say it was in a 2-week period after the film itself closed out, which is incredible. And even just to speak to his performance too, considering what he was battling as a human outside of the movie, his ability to still act on screen despite what he knew to be true about his own deteriorating body, he still delivered an amazing performance. And potentially, due to the circumstances, it also created this haunting, like, mirror image that is played against Robert De Niro and the rest of the characters that ultimately do go off to Vietnam. His character in particular, I think, is a really awesome, like, I don't even know the best way to, like, speak to his character, but it binds that group together, and he just delivered an amazing performance in this film.
I mean, he gets bullied, doesn't he, by the group at the beginning? You know what I mean? But you really kind of feel sorry for him. I felt sorry for him all the way through, you know, especially when De Niro turns on him towards the end, or Michael turns on him towards the end, should I say. You know, he's quite the pathetic character, but you kind of feel awful sorry for him. All of his friends go off to war except one. You know, he's kind of left there alone, and he's got like this gun that is kind of like his security blanket. You know what I mean? And you really kind of get this. Yeah, it's an unbelievable part. And I'd say this, by the way, he played Fredo in Gladiator, in The Godfather, right? And I'd say that this is I think he's better in this. As much as I loved Fredo and I loved, you know, both Godfather films that he was in, I just think that he's amazing in this. I think it's one of his greatest ever performances. You know, and having been in 5 films and been nominated for 5 Oscars for that is mesmerizing. Speaking of mesmerizing, Vilmos Zsigmond, the cinematographer. If you've not seen Vilmos's work, all right, it is some of the best stuff in the world. Go and watch Close Encounters. Shane always told me Close Encounters is one of his favorite films. And then when we did what's your top 5 films on on Filmmakers Academy, Shane didn't mention it. So I don't know if he changes like we do, but yeah, Close Encounters was one of Shane's favorites because Vilmos shot it, and also they had this light that was blasting through the door, when the kid goes to the door and everything. It's just one of the coolest shots of all time. So when Vilmos made that, I was hooked on him, really. But he's done these other ones. These are the 3 that he's been nominated for Best Cinematographer at the Oscars, and also The Deer Hunter. And you can actually see him here. He's stood next to Cimino. He's on the camera next to Cimino here, and he's also here in the midst of the water. The wildest one with this is that he's actually on a Fisher dolly there that fell off the ramps. So they were pushing it along to film this sort of outdoor water prison, and the Fisher dolly fell off the tracks into the water, and they needed 14 men to lift it out. So Vilmos kind of got into the weeds on this film, really, and it makes him one of my favorite cinematographers for that reason. Another guy that had an absolute crazy time on this film and got fired as well was Peter Zinner, and he was the editor. And I put it in one of those amazing factoids that we try and do to get lots of people viewing this. But like Peter Zinner had to cut 600,000 feet of film, right, down to this film. Like that's what he was presented with, which is about 110 miles of film. All right, it's an immense amount of film that he had to sort of like cut through. And this is during a time where you're cutting them on those old sort of, what were they called, Brendan? Moviolas, were they? The old things that they used
like
to...
a Steinbeck table editing.
Like Thelma Schumacher. Thelma Schumacher used to do. Yeah. And then eventually Cimino fired him after doing that 110 miles. After doing that mammoth task, Cimino fired him because, as we'll come to talk about, the wedding scene is so long. I think about 50 minutes, they said. The studio wanted it cut down, and Cimino said he wouldn't cut it down. So the studio kept saying, we need it cut down. And eventually they went straight to the editor. And the editor was doing it privately. Cimino caught him and fired him. So he finished off editing it himself. But nevertheless, Zinner was still nominated and won an Oscar for Best Editing. So I always liked it.
Do you know what stage in the production he got fired?
It was after cutting the wedding scenes, so I don't know whether that's sort of end of the first act or whether he'd cut a lot more of it before then. But yeah, he was definitely fired for doing the wedding scenes, because that's when Cimino went crazy. There's also stories that, by the way, the studio wanted to play 2 versions of the film. One with the long wedding scene and one with the shortened wedding scene, to see which one would resonate best with audiences, okay, with the test audience. And this happens all the time now. Apparently, Cimino sabotaged the projector for the shorter version playing. And you can check this out. It's all on, I think it's even on different trivia things, but he sabotaged the projector so that it would break and they would have to send everybody out and then fix it and then bring everybody back in and then show it. He sabotaged the projector so everybody liked the longer version where they didn't have to leave, better than the shorter version where they did. So, there you go. That's the editor and that's the team. And now, Brendan, as I said, the Tropic Thunder of it all, which is just crazy. We talked about Michael Cimino, and this is Michael Cimino here, by the way. He's sort of put mud on the bottom half of his face so he doesn't look like Michael Cimino. And this is the point where he's going to pull Robert De Niro and John Savage up into the helicopter. And before they get in, drop them from 25 feet. So one of them actually dislocated his knee, right? So this is the scene we've got here. Vilmos Zsigmond just leaning out with an an RE2C, it looks like. You know what I mean? So lots of crazy shit going on here. And certainly this story has some wild behind-the-scenes story. One of the main ones is this, Brendan, right? You see this guy on this side here, this fella. Can you see my pointer? Is it working?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. This guy here is a guy named Kriang Sak Chomanan, right? And this guy was a general in the Thai army, okay? And Cimino insisted on filming in Thailand. He thought that would give it the authentic Vietnam look. So that's why he went there. He wanted him to look authentic, which pushed the budget up from 7 million to 13 million. And when they got there, there'd just been a student uprising. like there'd been a massacre of students who'd been, trying to uprise in the north, and there was a military takeover in the same week that they started filming. So all of this stuff is going on. It's not exactly the safest place to film, right? And this guy, general here, this general, as I've said his name before, I'm not going to butcher it again. But yeah, this Thai military leader was the liaison for the film. He was the guy that was in charge of procuring weapons for them, procuring military vehicles like helicopters and, jeeps and things like that. This was the guy, right? And what's the wildest thing about this filming was, midway through filming, he came to the producer on a Friday night and said, I've got a military coup going on in the north. I have to go and suppress it. So don't worry, it won't take long, and I'll come back and I'll bring you all the stuff back on Monday. So he took all the vehicles, all the weapons, everything that they were using during filming to go and suppress a coup, and then come back. back and then give them all. And apparently there was still blood on some of the vehicles that they got back. So an absolutely crazy story, just about some of the filming that happened here. And this was the first one in Thailand. Absolutely nuts. Another thing was the helicopter. Oh, isn't it wild, Venom, right? This could only happen in the 70s. There was all kinds of crazy stories going on. There's a John Landis story that's out there that's very unsavory. But when they were making these war movies, they were just happy to throw caution to the wind. And
well, it also speaks to that time, too, of just film production, right? And I think this carries through all of Cimino's productions, whether if you look at Heaven's Gate, Cimino always wanted authenticity. If he was going to be able to bring it on screen, he wanted to show what it was like having this type of machinery, or in Heaven's Gate, being able to do that famous battle sequence. And especially at that time, look at how crazy the production of Apocalypse Now was. There's a reason why these type of movies are just not typically made anymore. Sure, you have Nolan, but even Nolan isn't quite operating still at scope and scale as like Cimino and some of these directors were in the 80s. There's so much more that is put into like the way film production is, for better. These productions were obviously a lot more dangerous, and think of the likes of like Sam Peckinpah and the way he shot. That dude was literally drunk on set every single day of principal photography. The way filmmaking was back then was so much different than what you can get away with today. And again, there's some awful stories that obviously came out of this period, which you said with the Twilight Zone movie and some of these other productions that ran amok. It was not easy to be able to shoot this type of cinema at a time where studios are throwing blank checks at directors to be able to make their vision.
Cimino, I think he thrived in that kind of environment. I think that sadly, we always talk about this is a guy who's been our inspiration for this kind of thing, just throwing caution to the wind and trying to, get something, become the director after an hour-long meeting with Clint Eastwood. We all dreamed that we could do this, but sadly, I think that the landscape has changed so much that this couldn't happen now. But it's still, I enjoy reveling in these stories. As I said, I was talking to somebody who was an AD today, and they were telling me about things that had happened on set, 10, 20 years ago. And they're just mesmerizing, when you learn about them, especially when some of your favorite movies like this one. As we've got here, this is this helicopter rescue, and you can see that's a BTS picture that you've got there in black and white. De Niro is literally doing it. They didn't have stunt guys for them. These were the real stunt guys because Cimino wanted them to experience it, in reality. Even if the script was pretty much a work of fiction, he wanted them to experience this kind of manic sort of Vietnam War thing that was going on. Brendan, you'll talk about Heaven's Gate at some point, I'm sure, but another film that if you don't know anything about it, Cimino insisted upon realism and authenticity from his actors and from his cast and from his crew and everybody like that. And it is mesmerizing the things that they would do from his director, in all this.
And I would love to just speak to that. I actually just dropped a link for everybody to watch what Cimino and the level of detail he went. And I was actually talking about this today with Kira, who actually just watched The Deer Hunter for the first time. And Heaven's Gate, the making of that was very similar to the making of The Deer Hunter. It's a lot of time spent. They shot this production for 6 months straight, to my understanding. And Cimino, he might not have done it for The Deer Hunter because I don't think it was necessary, but for Heaven's Gate, which had a lot of he was trying to speak to that period in history when there was a lot of like European migrants coming to the country. He went to levels, months. I think he spent 2 months in Camp Cimino, essentially having them go through dialect coaching, how to be able to dance properly for the time. This man, he wanted to work and he wanted to bring what was in his mind to life. And he was very adamant of it being as authentic as possible. And I think you can see that again. The Deer Hunter, his earlier films, even the films after Heaven's Gate, which never operated at the same level of these two films in particular, but he was a man that always wanted the most out of the production he could get.
Absolutely. I mean, like, this one is the one I always come back to. Whenever I have to tell a story and somebody says to me, well, what was Cimino like? I always throw to this, which is they got these helicopters, as I said, from the Thai army. Okay, this is a Thai army helicopter that they've put the United States Army on the side of it. Okay, and the wildest thing about this was they didn't have. I mean, Vilmos Zsigmond says they didn't have helicopters that could speak English, so they had to use hand signals. You know, he's sitting in the back with Michael Cimino, the director, and they're going. You know, they're doing hand signals to tell him what to do, which is nuts. But on one of the occasions, they're literally picking up De Niro and John Savage from the bridge, like a wire bridge that goes across this river, the River Kwai, right? And these skids here, these skids, wherever they are, hang on a minute, let me find them, sorry. These skids here, okay, they get stuck under the wire while De Niro and Savage are on the bridge, okay? And the pilot doesn't know, and he's going up, and it pulls the bridge apart. And you've literally got De Niro trying to free the helicopter from the wire, from the cable, and pull it off the skid. And Michael Cimino apparently is actually the guy who got it off. And then they took off and left. If you want to see the video of it, as I said, I've put it in our Instagram, and you can give that a watch. Gives us a few more views too, guys, right? It's absolutely nuts. And they were nearly cut in half by it. Another thing that happened, which is another crazy one, was this is De Niro here, and this is John Savage on the back. They were literally up in the helicopter, and Cimino's hand is the one that reaches out and grabs hold of John Savage and then just drops him from 25 to 30 feet into the water, and he dislocated his knee. You know, and De Niro fell after him as well. So they both actually, that drop, which is a shot from above like this, is actually Robert De Niro and John Savage dropping into the water. A final one, which is another crazy one, was this log that they're on when they first escaped from the water prison. This log here, okay, they had a cable underneath the water that was pulling it along, so it looked like it was drifting downstream. And what happened was it snapped. And this is even crazier, right? The raft, it broke away. It went into a whirlpool, and if you watch it on the film, it's a POV shot, and it spins around in circles because the camera is literally on the same log that's spinning around. And Cimino and his stuntmen jumped into the river and had to physically hold onto this log to stop it from drifting off. And one of the boats filming it ran over Michael Cimino's head. And this is wild. This is true, though. You can hear him drowning on the soundtrack. You can hear Cimino getting pushed under by the boat if you watch that scene through. You can hear him gargling. And he says in one of his interviews, that's me. That sound that's on there is me getting drowned by a boat that's filming these guys. So he wasn't afraid to lead from the front, you know?
And Bruce was asking, do you know if there was any stuntmen, or did all of the actors on screen do all of the stunts? Do you happen to know?
I believe all the actors did their own stunts in Thailand. Yeah, they didn't have any stunt doubles from what everything I've read. It's them doing it. So when you see Walken being pulled up into the helicopter, he's being pulled up, for real. It's actually happening, And when they're on that log, they're literally on that log, the three of them. Obviously, I don't think they expected the cable underneath to break and them to start drifting off down towards the South China Sea. But they literally they were literally on there, and then this happened. And as I said, Cimino's the one who's in the water with some of his crew, trying to stop them from drifting off. While Vilmos is still filming it. It sounds absolutely crazy. And having said that, now we go into what is one of my favourite bits. And we did it last week, but we won't do it as long as that this time. We're not going to do every single shot in the movie because we'd be here for 2 hours. And Brendan and I already did a 4-hour one on Eyes Wide Shut, which is great, by the way. You should all give it a listen because Brendan spent a long time editing it. But this is one of my favourite bits where we go shot for shot. And here's the BTS. You can actually see Cimino setting up a tracking shot right there, looking down on, is it Michael's trailer? I think it's Nick's trailer, isn't it? Yeah, it's Nick's trailer.
Yeah.
And then this one here, which is when they first come out of the steel mill. And then in that bottom corner down there, this one, that's actually shooting the wedding scene, which all of them have got beautiful backstories to them. But yeah, Brendan, as I put these up, I really want to kind of get your opinion on them as well and what you liked about them. And the first one is obviously, and I always try and judge a film on this. When I was a film teacher, by the way, this is an interesting thing. I always used to say to my students, if you want to comment on film, always ask yourself 3 questions. What's there? Why is it there? What does it do to you? Really simple. You know what I mean? Because it's the best way to comment on film. You know what I mean? What are you seeing? Why do you think it's been put on screen? And what does it do to you? What does it make you feel? What do you think it's there for? It's just a beautiful way. And I just thought I'd say it. So this is the rundown of the story. We start off at the steel mill, then we go to the bar, then we go to the wedding, and then we have this scene where they meet a Green Beret at the wedding. And then Michael and Nick, who are very close to like brothers, they go and sit on a basketball court and talk for a minute. And then finally we have the first deer hunt. So breaking down that first act, it's all set in Pennsylvania. Is it Clairton, Brendan? Clairton,
yeah, it's supposed to be Clairton, which is right outside of Pittsburgh, which now is unfortunately somewhat of a depressed town in modern like Pittsburgh just locale. It's not what I mean. You can even see there. It is very much an industry town. It's very much where steel mill workers lived. If you know Pittsburgh, have ever been there, there's a very specific type of like row home and architecture you can typically find in Western Pennsylvania. But yeah, Clairton is a real place. I know that you were saying they shot in Ohio, so I don't think that they shot in Clairton directly. I think that they did fabricate this location. But yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It was shot in Mingo Junction, Ohio, along Ohio's eastern border. So where's Pennsylvania? If it's Ohio's eastern border, is it literally next to it?
Oh yeah, they're right next to each other. There is the rivers that come down through there, but western Pennsylvania, where Pittsburgh is, in eastern Ohio, another big part of Steeltown was Steubenville. That's where a lot of these steel mills were, and I'm assuming that's probably super close. Where I grew up, right outside of Pittsburgh, which was a 17-minute drive to downtown Pittsburgh, where at the time there used to be a lot of steel mills. To go to Steubenville in Ohio would have been no more than maybe a 30-minute drive, for context.
So this, here it is, opening scene, opening moment. Reminds you of home, Brendan, all right? Why do you think he's included this? Why did he start here? What's this showing us?
I think that he wants to establish this world. Knowing Cimino, he really wanted to speak to the blue-collar perspective in a world that typically is not showcased. And honestly, ask yourself, how many movies do you see this? The people that manufactured steel, or back in the day when our middle class was predominantly a lot more of this type of work, right? We had things automotive, the steel industry, just manufacturing in general. And what's interesting is this was before the 1980s collapse, which essentially distributed this type of manufacturing overseas to places like Germany, China, Japan. This is when we were at the height, and there was of course a decline at this time in this type of work. But I think he really wants to be able to showcase the perspective, especially of the characters and the environment that these people inhabit. Which Pittsburgh back in that day, it was dirty. It was a dirty place, you know.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it was also a place with immense community, and you could see this back then. You know, and I know you probably speak to this, but to work
I don't mind you
in
saying
a
it though.
steel mill, you could provide for a full family just on your wage alone. So meaning the
Right.
wife could stay at home and be a stay-at-home mom. You could have a family of 6. There was during this one Anthony Bourdain episode when one of his last he went to Pittsburgh, and it was super controversial because Pittsburgh now is this really tech-centric city. And there's Carnegie Mellon, and it's known for its robotics. Facebook, Google, Uber all have their own offices there. And it's very much this place where they're focusing on things like AI and computing. And it's this city that is absolutely beautiful. And modern day Pittsburgh, for what it has become, is really awesome. It has one of the best medical centers in the world. But honestly, even the 2000s, you know, the 90s. 80s, 70s, Pittsburgh's was a far different city. It was a lot more rough around the edges, but within those communities, there were families that had awesome livelihoods. And Bourdain went into the Hill District, which is like mainly a black community. That's what it's known in Pittsburgh. And he interviewed at the time, he was in his older years, in his 80s, and he said he provided through just working at a steel mill alone for a family of 13. So to just add context of how great these jobs were, Pittsburgh might not have been the prettiest. It might not have been the most environmentally considerate. You know, a lot of the runoff from the steel industry went into the river and into the sky. But where there was work, there was opportunity for people to live and have a life. And I always think that's the interesting duality about this time. And what I love so much about The Deer Hunter is it shows that. It shows the community. It shows the Russian, the Polish, you can still find it. It's not as prominent anymore. But at the time, through that period, these immigrants that were coming from these Eastern European countries were settling here to work. The Irish. There's a lot of famous books. I even think I have a really awesome book, and I'll try to find that while you speak to this, Chris. But I think that's what Cimino was so fascinated about, you know?
Yeah. You're right. I mean, this steel mill in the distance there, it really is. It's looming over this whole town. You know what I mean? It's always there. It's always present. And it shows, I mean, like everybody in the town, like it's a little bit where I grew up. It was all about mining and cotton mills. You know what I mean? And everybody would grow up as miners. There's a great film that's called Brassed Off. If anybody's seen it, it's a British film, and it's all about, you know, this mining town, and everybody's, you know, it starts off with everybody showering after they've been down the mines, and they're all covered in coal and stuff like that. And it's like showing these working class communities. You know what I mean? This is like the inescapable labor that they all had to go through. You know, this is the weight that presses down on them. And that's what I saw in this first scene. It was like showing us this is a working class town. You know, this is a place where everybody's going to work in the steel mills and everything like that. You know what I mean? And the interesting thing, like you just said, they'd be gone in like 10 more years. You know, all the steel mills would be gone, and this community would be, you know, defunct for a bit. I'd be certainly struggling. You know what I mean?
Well, most of these manufacturing cities are still left defunct. Look at Youngstown State, historically another big coal town, manufacturing town. If you go to Youngstown, Ohio, or even a lot of the cities in Ohio, it's these cities used to have so much work and so much opportunity. But as our jobs were shipped overseas, and, you know, very reminiscent of what we see happening with the film industry, it leaves a lot in its wake, and it left a lot of opportunity moving to other places. But how easy is it for people that have had their whole lives here to just upheave and move? That's a very tall ask for people that even still at this time might have been living paycheck to paycheck. And 2 additional resources, Chris, I don't know if you could stop sharing your screen for 1 second.
Yeah, let me stop.
So these are really awesome. So one, this was actually a book that we all had to read in high school. It's called Out of the Furnace. And it essentially followed, I think it was a Slovakian family that came from Czechoslovakia, or at the time it must have just been Slovakia, right? This was before. Nonetheless, Slovakian family, they came to Western Pennsylvania to work in the steel mills, in an amazing piece of literature that really showcases how hard life was in the early 1900s, turn of the century. But then one I highly recommend everyone reading or wanting to understand the decline of the industry is When the Wolf Finally Came. This is one of my favorite personal books that really chronicles what life was like, where the first unions came from, Amalgamite, and the collapse, and how
That's cool.
union greed essentially forced a lot of problems in the core of the over corporatization of the steel industry, pushing jobs away. And these two were super fascinating because even though at this time when they were shooting this movie, a lot of these problems weren't what they are today, there being a lack of manufacturing, I think Cimino, being as a genius as he was, he could see the diminishing middle class because at that point, post Vietnam, the economy is in a very interesting place. The inner cities are kind of a mess. The 70s, New York City, Los Angeles, kind of a mess. Politics, the way that we perceive war. And like, my dad fought in Vietnam, and to add context of how bad it was to be a soldier, my father, the last time he put on his uniform, he essentially landed in the airport, got off the plane. The moment he stepped off the plane, and this I believe was towards the tail end of the war, he was met with an angry crowd of individuals that essentially like spit on him, yelled, and he took a beeline to the bathroom, took his uniform on, never wore it again, and essentially has never really spent a lot of time talking about Vietnam. And in the beginning of this movie, we see these characters that aren't affected by war yet. And I know there's so much to talk about that, but yeah, there's so much that Cimino was trying to speak to in a way that was different when we talk about like Eyes Wide Shut in the film prior. Sure, there's a lot of like metaphor in that movie, and there is as well in this film, but he's also this amazing filmmaker that's speaking in so much more of a documentary perspective. So super fascinating.
I'd agree with you on that, this documentary style feel. You know what I mean? And we've gone from, you're right, we've gone from an Eyes Wide Shut where it's a world we know nothing about to a subject that we feel, people at the time would have felt like they knew an awful lot about, but actually didn't. You know, and that's what it feels like Cimino was trying to say. Let's jump back into it as well, though. Hang on one sec. There we go. Yeah, so, I've put it there, actually, Brendan. I was going to show you this because you're absolutely right. Grime streaked, squatting in the river. The language that's used in the script that's just round here is very kind of grimy and very kind of, not a nice place to live, really. It describes it exactly as you were saying. These aren't great places. These are places that are a bit grimy and everything like that, but they've got a hell of a community. And you see that in these opening scenes. One of the coolest things I read, and I'll put a link to it as we talk, is Vilmos Zsigmond was interviewed on American Cinematographer. Or it might be in the ASC magazine, actually, come to think about it. It might be ASC magazine. Vilmos said that they were shooting in midsummer. So in the middle of June when it was absolutely roasting outside. So they were trying to show this as autumnal/winter time in Pittsburgh. And obviously that's not easy to do when it's midsummer. So they were shooting first thing in the morning, last thing at night. And they were wetting down the roads here to show that it was kind of like overcast and rainy and not the best, so you can see it here. Yeah. And then this bit, Brendan, which I didn't get the one of them coming down the stairs, sadly, but this is the one that I've got of them all together as a team. This is the first thing we see as soon as they come out of that steel mill, as soon as they kind of, walk through all the people who are getting changed or getting showered or anything like this. This is the first shot of, I suppose, our Reservoir Dogs shot of them all. Definitely a reference for Reservoir Dogs because Tarantino said this is one of his favorite films of all time, and he said when he saw it he thought it was the best film ever made. So that makes me think that Reservoir Dogs has a little bit of a kind of nod to this one in that walking scene.
Absolutely. I also just love the energy that this is something that you can see in this movie especially. Cimino was such an amazing actor or director to block actors. And I know that we don't have this shot, but if you've seen this movie, when they're walking down the steps or through the locker room, there's this level of physicality that all the men have. And it's super fascinating because I did not think about this, but Kira mentioned it and you said it earlier in this stream. This is a very masculine film. And, I never really thought about it that way, but Kira was like, yeah, this is a man's movie,
It is.
And there is obviously the female perspective that's given by Meryl Streep, but by and large, this is the male journey, especially at that time in Vietnam, as people were making the choice to go and participate in this war and working in the steel mill, a very male environment. You see it as early as that locker room, but the camaraderie of the male experience. And I love what he tries to do here with this framing, the way that it dollies over and you have that foreground element of the car and then it lands on them. And obviously these characters are leading the charge of men as the shift changes over, because the steel mill, that was a 24-hour operation, and there would
Yeah.
be the sound, and I think you even hear it in the background. It's not as pronounced as it might have actually would have been on the yard, but a lot of times there was a horn or a bell as shifts changed over in the yard, and you could see that in the locker room as some people were leaving and some people were coming in for the shift. And really grueling experience. But even though it's steel industry work, that plays perfectly into the larger theme of going to war and this whole male experience. It's awesome. It's a really great establishing shot. Yeah.
There's total machismo, I would call it, if that's a real word. Like, and then obviously you've got this shot as well, Brendan, which I think I kind of skimmed past. But like inside the steel mill, all of this, it's raw violence, it's forging steel. It's very much this kind of aggressive act of making steel. You can actually see it here. And Vilmos actually talked about this. He was talking about the fact that obviously it's very bright. And he was worried that because of the brightness of making these, I don't know, what do you call them, ingots, whatever they are, these big, long pieces of steel, from doing this, he was worried that all you would get is the actors in complete silhouette. You'd never actually see them. So that's why the doors are open at the back here. They would never usually open in the steel mill, but they opened these doors at the back here so you could get light in, so they could show that it was Robert De Niro who was doing the job, because all of the actors, again, no stunt doubles, they were actually working within this steel mill. And Vilmos said this was one of the hardest shoots because it was so hot in there, and they were trying to film this incredibly, aggressive activity, I'd say.
And my dad, he worked in the steel mill, and I was actually dropping us in the chat for some of the people. So my dad, it was very common as a high school student when you're of age or during college to be able to do your summer months working in a steel mill. That was a very common thing. And my dad, where he grew up in Burgettstown, Pennsylvania, his whole family on that side, they were Czechoslovakian Irish. They all worked in the steel mill. My grandfather worked in the steel mill their whole life. And my dad, not too long ago, I think a couple of years ago, was telling me his time, because he essentially worked in the steel mill at the time the GI Bill was really good, to be able to get benefits that if you went and I think you served 2 to 4 years, you would be able to get a payout and then money towards going to college, which he went to Nam in the Air Force, a part of the 1st Battalion to essentially lay communication on the ground. So he's a part of the engineer, telecommunication battalion, which was not done in prior wars. So this was already like a big deal. And then on the way back, when he was at University of Pittsburgh and back stateside, he would then work in the steel mills in between semesters. And he said the level of heat was unimaginable. He was like, there was no escaping it. Even with your protective gear, you would immediately sweat through it. And it would be so hot that it would not like melt to your skin, but to get your clothes off, it was just attached to it. Your sweat was binding to the fabric. And he said it was really hard work. But he said it was also really interesting work because it distilled in you a really strong work ethic to never want to go back into that environment. He was like, it essentially made me grow up to want to never have to work in that, which ultimately he became an engineer, went to University of Pittsburgh and got out of this, but super fascinating.
That sounds amazing. I mean, it sounds unbelievable. You know what I mean? But it's proven it. You know what I mean? Like I said, Vilmos said that it was one of the hardest days he's ever spent filming, and you can see, it's obviously quite a hellish place to be. Perhaps it's meant to depict a kind of hellishness, I suppose.
And the casualty at the time too. It was dangerous, very dangerous to work in a steel mill.
Yeah. And I think that also brings them close together as well. You see the things that they're going through on a daily basis. You know what I mean? Prior to them all going off to Vietnam. One of the things that I read that Cimino said was this bit of the line here: we give an hour of character development before the story kicks in. All right. And he said that as a kind of thing of pride. It wasn't like a bad review. It's true, though. What he was trying to do, and somebody else wrote this on another website that I read sometime. He was saying Cimino is doing what Peter Jackson is doing in King Kong, right? He's getting you to know the characters and getting you to like the characters. So when they start breaking down, you actually care. You know what I mean? And their fates actually have meaning. And that's why he spent so long building them in this first act. We see them coming out of the steel mill, and then we see them go off and go to the bar together and start singing together. And you see what Nick's like. You see that Christopher Walken, I've managed to include a really cool gif there, and I'm proud of myself for doing gifs, right? But like doing dancing and stuff like that, they're all singing. You see De Niro smiling for the only time in the film. I'm joking, but one of the few times in the film you see him smile. They're all singing "You're Just Too Good to Be True," as well. So like they're all having a great time. We spend time with these guys in the bar. We spend time with them coming out of work, and then we go to this wedding scene. And I think that, that's all to show us. And this long wedding scene, as I said, very controversial. He kept it going for so long. There were people saying, we were in the wedding scene so long, I should have brought a gift, right? And it's like, he is in that wedding scene for an awful long time, but there's a reason for it. He's trying to get us to see these little micro movements and moments. You know what I mean? Like a great one, as I said before, was De Niro and Linda giving each other these looks while Christopher Walken's dancing with Linda. He knows, we know that he wants her, but it's his best friend's girl, and she's the forbidden fruit. And yet it is all happening within a couple of glances in the midst of this realistic wedding scene. And when I say realistic, I mean it. It was set in Cleveland. They filmed it in Cleveland at a real Russian Orthodox cathedral. At a real, they basically wanted to make this into a real wedding for 5 days. They invited all of the extras that they invited were actually Russian immigrants. They were actually Russian immigrant families, and they said, "We'll give you a bump if you bring gift wrapped boxes." And these Russian immigrants who came to this wedding, as extras, they brought literal real gifts. They brought china, they brought silverware for the bride and groom, even though they were actors. And it just showed the community that was going on around around this film, and the community that they tried to instill. And Brendan, like you were saying, I think this was the thing that you said earlier on, and I saw it the most in this wedding scene. Documentary. I wrote it down here just so I could remember it. You said it was very documentary-like, and it is. It's by design that way. That this realism that we get. Everything feels totally unconstructed. It feels like we're just watching them exist and seeing the world that they've grown up in. These long, uninterrupted takes that we've got. Even in the bar, it's very long and uninterrupted. And then when we come to this wedding, there's all these dances and there's all these things. And we're at the wedding an awful long time. There's very minimal cutting, and I felt like that was, like it's all shot on like a very wide screen as well, Brendan, you'll notice. And that's showing, can you imagine every single one of these long shots? You're just getting the wedding guests to dance around in the background. You've got like maybe 100 people in the shot at once. It's absolutely massive. It's showing the chaos, really, this chaos of the wedding scene. You know what I mean? All of the music is a real band. The guy who's the priest is the real priest. Everything about it is as realistic as we can. All the sound is diegetic, and we don't have hardly any dialogue in this bit. You know what I mean? Because he wants to establish that this is real as possible. And that's why I think that it is important that it is a 50-minute scene or however long it is. I've not timed it because I just enjoy it. I don't feel like we're there for a long time. I actually really enjoy the cutting in between it. And you can see is Vilmos and Cimino right in the center. Yeah, tell me more, Brendan, if you agree. Is there anything that you disagree with that I've said there?
No, I would agree with all of it. I think Cimino, he operates at his best in these set piece moments. You see it in all of his movies, and especially The Deer Hunter and Heaven's Gate. He is operating at a level where he wants to see a lot going on, and he really loves bringing energy to these characters. And what's a lot more unorthodox about Cimino, and I think he talks about it in his writing process, especially the one interview that he did. He always talked about having these moments that really spoke to the film, but the characters might not have what we find in modern cinema speaking to the plot or speaking to the action of the movie. And you see this beat after beat. he's trying to show you this is what the lives of these individuals look like as they're about to head into what will inevitably a chapter turn moment as three of them go to war and their friendship is redefined. And it's, there's a lot he's pushing towards. He's pushing towards this marriage and this wedding with Tom Savage's character, or John Savage's character.
John Savage, yeah.
Yeah, John Savage's character. And then the very next day, they want to go on the hunt. And I feel like what I love about him is he really tries to make the audience earn the moment. And especially for a film that's 3 hours long, he's really trying to be able to tell the perspective and what the life was like. And when we say documentarian, or this documentary style or perspective that he has, it's not that the movie doesn't feel cinematic or that it's not operating on this really elevated narrative level. It's just he's so authentic with the perspective that he's trying to speak to, whether it's hiring these Russian, individuals that lived at that time. In Pittsburgh, there's still a lot of Russian Orthodox churches that still stand and exist, whether it's in the Strip District or throughout, Polish Hill or through the Russian part of the Pittsburgh or just Western Pennsylvania and Ohio. They really did their research, and it was very, very apparent, especially in this sequence.
Yeah, I mean, as well, I think it was Cimino who said something like, give me a 10mm lens, you know what I mean? I'll shoot anything for as long as you want, you know what I mean? It's this guy but he wasn't afraid to show these nice big wide tableaus that we see. It's very, I think another one that I forgot to say was he was influenced heavily by John Ford. He always spoke about John Ford as like a massive inspiration for him. And like these wide vistas that we see, even indoors, are very John Fordy, I feel. You know what I mean? And then as well, what he does is, we don't have any, I've written it down here, spoken exposition I just wrote on the end of my book. There's no exposition apart from one line where I think it's John Savage's Stephen says something like, "Oh, I'm getting married today." That's the only time that we're let into these people's lives or given any exposition about them and their characters. Everything else is totally unspoken. You know what I mean? We have to watch for it. We have to see these little micro movements and things. A great example, Stephen and the bride, they drink from these it's like a very strange cup, isn't it? Do you remember, Brendan? It's got like these two little cups on it and on things, and they both drink wine out of it. And 2 drops spill on the bride's dress. A little bit of trivia for you: the person who drops those 2 droplets is Michael Cimino himself, right? But they land on her dress, and that's meant to be a sign of bad luck for the 2 of them, you know what I mean? But we just cut away from it afterwards, and then that's kind of left for us to just think, oh God, that might not be a good sign or whatever. The wedding itself, it doesn't explain the characters. It sort of lets them reveal themselves naturally. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I really like. You're watching something that has this documentary reality, and the characters are emerging through their behavior and the way they talk to each other. And one of the scenes actually that does this best is this next. Oh yeah, I'll come back to that. Is this next one when they meet the Green Beret, and you actually have it here where I've put it in the a little clip that I've taken from the script. Like basically where Michael's saying, "Oh, we're going to the Airborne too, hey," and he's trying desperately to kind of befriend this Green Beret who's clearly come home from the war, and the sergeant looks over at them and delivers a big blank smile and just says the F word, with an it at the end. And basically, I'm not swearing because Brendan has to edit it, and it takes time. So I'm editing myself, right? I'll have a horn eventually. I'll just squeeze it here. But yeah, so we have that, and then it really impacts on Michael. He actually gets really aggressive, and we actually see that, he kind of hero worships these soldiers who go off to war, and he definitely has a viewpoint of war and of soldiers at the beginning here that is vastly different when he comes back. And this is the moment that we actually see it. This is a very kind of like pre-Vietnam War America that we're seeing in these 3 young lads here. Okay. And the very drunk, very innocent. And then we look across, and then we have the Green Beret, who is vastly different. You know what I mean? And it's like a ghostly preview of what's to come is the best way I can describe it. And that's what I love most about this scene. I think it's a phenomenal scene. And in the background, again, you've still got all of these Russian immigrant extras just dancing around and having a wonderful time. Again, all the sound diegetic. Anything to add to that one, Brendan?
I just love the drunk guy that's on the table in the background who's just completely tapped out.
Yeah.
And that was another thing. There was a lot of alcohol at that time. Western Pennsylvania was notorious for alcoholism, unfortunately, due to the steel mills and just the nature of the work. That was like a prerequisite. And you see that in these characters. Their outlet, even though it is community, when community is together, alcohol is typically the thing that they're all sharing and communing with. And I think Cimino is just so good. You know, what's fascinating with this whole wedding sequence and something that I wanted to speak to, his brilliance in terms of capability and what he was able to see in his mind and then translate to screen. He hated storyboarding, would not storyboard.
Yeah, he did.
Very notorious. And think about these set pieces. How do you craft something without there not being the visuals to be able to speak to it? But he was capable of operating at this level where he could operate the production, lead it, craft this imagery, and it feels so authentic and be so large of scale. It's awesome. But yeah, I love that.
Didn't he call it?
Yeah.
Didn't he call it paint
Yeah.
by numbers when he
Yeah.
did the shot list? Yeah.
Oh yeah, he even spoke to the time of, you could see the difference between filmmakers that went to film school versus himself, who was a bit more self-taught and, you know, navigated through architecture, painting, different art forms to be able to sharpen his like axe to be able to be the director that he wanted to be. And you see that architecture is huge in all of his films. He loves, whether it's this movie and inside the hall or being at the church or the Heaven's Gate with the dance sequence and the rollerblades inside the roller hall. He was always designing the exteriors and building structures to be able to shoot and get what he ultimately needed for the film.
Yeah. I love that. There was another story he told. Oh yeah, that was it. His AD came to him and said, "You're breaking the 180 here." And he said, "I don't even know what the 180 is." He was
That's
just,
awesome.
you know, Mr. No Film School here, and he directs, you know, an absolute masterpiece. Going back to this one, I'll just fire it in there. Again, it was meant to be fall. I wrote it up here in the top corner so I won't forget, and then I just quickly skip past it, but I want to go back to it. Again, this was being shot midsummer. So Vilmos tells a great story how all of the trees, they removed the leaves, painted them orange, and stuck them back on, or just left them off. All right, so they could make it look like it was mid-autumn. And the other one was, apparently when the grass was green, they sprayed it with a chemical and it turned it all California brown, and destroyed most people's gardens apparently because this chemical wasn't meant to be put on. So yeah, they're the quick sort of aside for you. But yeah, the green beret scene is certainly a powerful one. And then we got to this one that's probably one of my favorites, and certainly a moment where we have dialogue. We've had these moments where we've had no dialogue whatsoever, a long time of that. And then we get to this bit where they're, you know, Nick and Mike have this time, and I've had to brighten it up, so it looks horrendous on it. Forgive me, Vilmos Signal's going to strike me down for this. It looked absolutely awful. But I had to kind of brighten it up so it wouldn't look dark on the screen. So that's why it looks horrific here. But Vilmos is actually one of the most gifted cinematographers of all time. So don't strike me down, Vilmos, for making it too Gordon Willis. But yeah, I mean, Nick and Mike are sitting together, and there's just this moment where he says, "Make sure you bring me back. Don't leave me out there. You got to promise." You know what I mean? And it's something that structurally, you know, it comes almost like 20 to 25 minutes in, right on that moment for you screenwriters. 50 to 55 minutes in, right on that moment on the 1/3 of the film. And it's right there. This moment here is pretty much the thing that sets up our ending, which if you've seen this film, which I hope you have, you'll know that that's what drives Michael to go back for him. You know, this promise that he makes here. And there's two of these conversations that Mike and Nick have really early on in this, and early on I say, but what I mean is in this first act that really kind of give us that bookend to start, and then something that we come back to. And it's this conversation here where he says he won't leave him, and he promises that he won't leave him when they go to Vietnam. And the other one is Michael's one-shot theory, which is revealed just before the first deer hunt. And it's basically Michael, Robert De Niro's character, believes in this idea of one shot. When you're out deer hunting, you take one shot. You don't take two. Two's sloppy. Two's disrespectful. Two's not manly. You take one shot when you're killing a deer. And that's the sort of Michael's ethos on life. I think I put it in here actually. Yeah, the thing about one shot. I don't think about one shot that much anymore, Mike. You have to think about one shot. A deer should be taken with one shot. One shot is what it's all about. You try to tell people, they won't listen. So he really does have this kind of guiding principle of one shot. And these guys all go off to hunt. And you know where that hunt's taking place in Pittsburgh, Sweeney?
Yeah, not in Western Pennsylvania. That is what's funny. And hunting is like a very big thing in Western Pennsylvania, but this is not what Western Pennsylvania looks like at all.
They've had to cross the country. This is shot in Washington State. It's up Mount Baker, this.
Yeah.
So I think that what Cimino wanted was he wanted something scenic. That's obviously Pennsylvania's scenic. I'm not slagging off your home state, but he wanted something breathtaking and mountainous to contrast with obviously the industrial steel mill lives of these people. That's in kind of like living in trailers and all that kind of stuff. He wanted something exactly opposite to that.
Mm-hmm. It almost is a little fantastical, especially it's maybe not for those who don't know Western Pennsylvania. You could maybe make the argument that they went down into the West Virginia, at least has a mountain chain, but it's not super close. And I don't think they could cross state lines to go deer hunting. So, but if you know the context, like it is kind of fantastical because they go from what you exactly said, this really grimy, small industry town to this very expansive, lush and beautiful exteriors, these mountains that are in Washington, but still it speaks so much to the story. It's like having this great escape right in your backyard. And it is true. Like people loved deer hunting. When I was in high school, the days that deer hunting happened, I think it was for a week or two in the calendar year. None of the boys would be in school until they got their deer. They would come back. I think most people would try to go and try to get it as quick as possible, but it was very, very much an important thing of culture in Western Pennsylvania.
Wow. I mean, one of the things that I found out as a piece of trivia from this as well was they didn't have any deer or bucks that they wanted, obviously, to shoot because he kills one and he goes after a second. You know what I mean? Later on in the movie. So they had to fly them out. And I think they flew them out from like woods on the East Coast. Somebody can check that out for me. But yeah, I'm fairly certain that I've read that somewhere. So he literally had to pay a lot of money to transport 2 bucks over to Washington State, where he also took the whole production over. So Cimino's just started writing checks left, right, and center here. Another thing about this scene, just very quickly, is the "this is this" speech, which is where De Niro's being stubborn, living by this kind of code that others find it really difficult to understand, and Cazale, right there in the foreground of shot, is just made to feel pathetic and stupid. He's not coming with them to Vietnam, and it's a really powerful scene for that reason. One of the other most powerful things about this scene, I'll say, is like this bit. And Brendan, you remember what the soundtrack is to this scene
I can't
here?
remember.
It's like kind of like this choral music, right? And it's actually Russian liturgy music from the Orthodox Church, right? That they recorded on the day of the wedding. And I think that that's because to Mike, Robert De Niro's character, who goes off on his own. Remember, he likes the loneliness. He likes the solitude of these mountains. He goes off and there's this kind of really spiritual, holy music. And I think it's because to him, this is his holy place. This is the holiest place in the world for him. It's sacred. It's a place where he can go and be himself, And I don't know, but hunting deer is his innocence, like you said about all the guys who used to, back home,
Oh, yeah.
And maybe that is, yeah, go on.
Is this his cabin ultimately? Do you know that?
I don't know, and it doesn't really say it in the script because I was looking for that myself. Is this where he goes? Is this his cabin? But I wonder if it's just one that's frequented by the guys. You know what I mean? Because they go there, and then if you remember, they go back to the bar where they started Welsh's bar, which it's called. You know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know. Is the honest
Beautiful
answer
shot.
to that? But yeah, this shot is incredible. Vilmos, I've done you proud there by not brightening it up or messing around and stuff like this, But very blue. It's been, blue processing here just to make it seem a lot more wintry than it is. So
I
very
dropped
good.
this in the chat, and if you've never seen Vilmos Zsigmond's work on Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller, another movie that takes place up in the
Outstanding.
mountains with Warren Beatty, I mean, Zsigmond was just one of the best DPs. There is a shot in particular at the beginning of the film when they're crossing this bridge. Warren Beatty's character lights a match to be able to, I think, spark up his cigar. And the way that Vilmos shot that, shortly after that movie was released, he got a phone call from Stanley Kubrick asking how he pulled that like fire cherry bloom when he was lighting. I can't remember if it was a cigar or cigarette, but nonetheless, this optical effect that was very beautiful. And that movie is very beautiful. And if there's one thing that Zsigmond, I think, is so good at, is shooting exteriors like this, wilderness,
Oh yeah.
large, these amazing tableau style exteriors. It shows through his work.
And that's my some of my favorite bits of this film. On saying that, having said that, it's this glorious kind of view here. I mean, if we cut forward maybe two things, we go from those tranquil mountains to another stunning vista, but this time, war-torn Vietnam. This massive juxtaposition here. And again, beautiful shots, both of them, phenomenal shots. But like I said, we go from one to the exact extreme, the juxtaposition of beauty and then destruction. And you can see it in these clips here, and then as well, we see the difference of them. This is now in Act 2. So we've gone from, I just wanted to show that massive change from this into a Vietnamese mountain range getting napalmed. You know what I mean? Just showing that difference. But yeah, so we're going to take a look at that in Act 2. And we're going to look at the Thai water prison scene, which everybody is very familiar with. Anybody who's not seen this film, like when I told my wife about it, she said, oh yeah, that prison scene when they do the Russian roulette, that's pretty much what everybody remembers. And look, Cimino was right. He didn't allow him to delete that from the original script. And there's a reason. It's become the seminal movie for that shocking thing. Even if, as we've found out, it wasn't actually used in Vietnam ever. There's no record of the Viet Cong ever using it. Cimino found a way to worm it into his script. And many say that it's because it's very metaphorical and it's meant to show the danger that they're in every day and all that kind of stuff. Then, as I said, we'll go quickly through the escape into the river because we've talked about it. And then when they go to Saigon and we see what Saigon's like. So this is Act 2 now as we break it down. And we start off by it's very quick. It goes from these beautiful locked off shots and these slow pans across to being handheld and everything like this. And Brendan, I looked this up for you because when we watched this the other night, and we put it on while we were working, everybody, so that we could make sure we were all focused for you guys this Sunday. There is 16mm documentary footage used in this film at this point, and
That
Vilmos
one
was
shot.
yeah. Well, there's a couple of them because there's another one when when they're all walking back to the when he takes John Savage to that Jeep and it drives off. There's a few 16mm documentary grainy footage that's in there, and Vilmos actually talks about this, and he says pushing the film 2 stops and overdeveloping, he was able to downgrade the negative to make it match that. So it's easy to miss because he pushed it 2 stops and he overdeveloped it to make the negative more downgrade. So there you go. And the thing is as well, what you got to remember is that at this point we move so quickly. We cut from the Vietnam mountains to Robert De Niro setting fire to whatever, blazing this flamethrower and all this kind of stuff, napalm in a whole village. We've got all kinds of stuff going on here, and it goes so fast. We don't see any of them, training like you would do in other Vietnam movies, you'd see in Full Metal Jacket or anything like that. This is literally they're in the midst of it. They've gone from the boys at the wedding, the boys on, in the car on the way to the deer hunt, all being bros, to now the fighting, and the horror. I wrote it down here. Horror has become normalized at this point. You know what I mean? You can see how the shocking things they do are just cut through. That's we cut from one to the other to the other to the other, and I think as well you got to remember at this point Americans had seen Vietnam on their news screens. They'd seen the protests, they'd seen things like this, but they'd never seen anything quite like this that was a film version of it. You know what I mean? And making it personal to Mike and Nick and Steve and all this, and making it unavoidable as well. We've gone from this slow exposition to now this absolutely wild, everything's quick, everything's disorientating. And he's making us feel, you're not at home anymore. Dorothy's not in Kansas anymore, as they said in, I don't know why I'm thinking this, but in Avatar, this whole scene here, this whole setup literally does it. And one of the lines that's in the script, again, repeating what was said by the Green Beret at the wedding. What the hell are you doing here? Don't worry, Sweeney, I'm not going to say it, but you see the word there if you're all looking at your screens. If not, you can imagine the word. All right, but this is what we see, the change in Mike almost immediately, and then we get to this Thai water prison, which, Brendan, I know you were going to want to talk about at some point, but we've gone through this really kind of quick-paced thing. I didn't even see them get arrested. We've just quickly gone through these different bits, and now here they are. And we're already trying to catch up. And the first thing that we probably see when we finally get stopped is them underneath this prison, barbed wire everywhere, and Stephen losing it every time there's a click.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really quite disorientating. What do you think?
And it really does move super quick. And when I was rewatching it today before we got into this call, it is this series of events of helicopters flying in, the one guy throwing what looks like a grenade or some type of explosive in that hole that's in the ground, to then Robert De Niro's character grabbing the flamethrower. And we have this moment where Steve, Nick, and Mike all connect, and you can see Mike is so focused on what his mission was, or at least the casualty that's playing out. And then those bombs start to go off, and then it cuts to them right here. They're already entrapped. You don't really get to even see them get captured. It's just a series of explosions that are slowly crawling to them. They fall on the ground, and then we end up in this jail cell. And, this is one of the smaller parts of the film, the actual Vietnam experience that we ultimately see with these characters. So it is jarring, but it's so well punctuated from the sequence prior in this turning point when we're in the mountains to this. He wanted it to be jarring on purpose, and I think Cimino did a really awesome job being able to bring this to life. And a fun fact, and I'm pretty sure that this has been confirmed, but if you know Hideo Kojima, Metal Gear Solid, I think a lot of the influence around Mike as a character is what Hideo Kojima based at least the appearance of Solid Snake or Big Boss in Metal Gear Solid, especially with the bandana. And when you see him later, when he's wearing the trench coat with the green beret, very much looks like Metal Gear Solid. And I love that nod that Hideo Kojima did later on, because I also think he is a big fan of this movie as well. But yeah, it's great. It's great imagery. And you could tell, I love the shots too, when the helicopters are first coming in those almost top-down aerial shots. The way that he's able to push and move the camera, Cimino, once again, just really knew how to use the medium to its most impactful, intent. It was so good. And of course, Vilmos as well, them collaborating, be able to build this world. It's awesome.
It's bonkers. And like you said as well, I talked about their eyes so many times. But again, just like these shots, I mean, Vilmos, my goodness, you know what I mean? How dark it is under there, and we managed to capture this light just here, just hitting his eye. I sound like Shane now, which is probably the only time I'll ever sound like Shane. But you know what I mean? It's absolutely stunning that we see Walken going through this change, and all of them going through this change. This is the bit now. Okay, when you actually see him with a gun to the head, which is probably what's going to get us pulled down, Sweeney. We kind of said this before, but the scene where they've got, I'm not going to play the video, don't worry. I know we'll definitely get banned for that one. But this scene where they've all got the guns to the head and he asks for 3 bullets. I'm going to do 3 bullets and everything like that. It is long, drawn out. It is held back. And honestly, I'd say I have struggled to find anything that is as tense as that in any film I've ever watched since. I think that it's one of the most scary things when there's 3 bullets, that they've got these clicks that are going on, and he's shouting at him. And in fact, there's so much less said in the clip than there is in the script. In the script, Michael goes off on a tangent and starts calling himself the Archangel and saying Michael is great, Michael is magic, Michael is not magic Mike, but Michael is magic, and Michael is wonderful. And he does this kind of like long speeches, where in this he's just laughing and screaming and cutting from one extreme to the other, and it's absolutely intoxicating to watch. Yeah, I mean, I understand why this was the most memorable moment for most people in this film, you know? And like,
Absolutely.
what Cimino says about this, which always, because I always wanted to know what his thoughts were on this. He said, combat is mostly about waiting, right? Combat is about mostly about sitting around doing nothing, waiting for things to happen. And when death arrives, it is sudden, it is random, and it is violent. And that's what when he was talking about war, those are the three things. When death arrives, it is sudden, random, and violent, right? And cinema can't dramatize the waiting. It finds it very difficult to do that. So when you do Russian roulette, you can make the audience feel the terror of the wait, the click, and then the randomness of the death. It's going to pick one of them at a time. It nearly gets John Savage, but he manages to move it quickly, and it's that is absolutely eerie. And yeah, it's stunning to watch. As I said, I would have clicked this video here, but I don't want us to get pulled down. But if you want to watch it, there's loads of this scene on YouTube, and this one, they've reversed it. So he's got the gun on the other side of his head. But besides that, it's great. And
Chris, you speak so well to just that concept. Well, you just speak so well to that concept of war not being immediate, and there is this concept of having to wait and not knowing when your time could potentially come, especially in these battles. And I think this film, we talked about it early in the stream with the thin red line, this concept of waiting for this next battle to break out or gunfight or something that slowly picks away at the crew that you ultimately rolled out with as you see people die. And, that concept's so true because us as consumers, who watch war movies and don't actually participate in the act of going into military, it's really easy for us to think that there's just constant firefights and this constant, like pushing the needle and battles happening. But in reality, so much of it is waiting for these things to arise that will ultimately propel you into these moments of conflict. And that's where the psychological tension really does brew for these people. Sure, the PTSD does build for the unimaginable that they ultimately have to face, but it continues to percolate when you just don't know when it's going to happen next. And I think you really spoke to that really brilliantly, because that's something I realized even with the Civil War, the concept of, sure, we had such a big country and we were in civil war, but it's not like battles were happening every second, especially with land that's so large. It's really easy to think that we were just constantly in this conflict, but it's just not the case. War happens slowly over years and years with battles, and sometimes battles are not happening every single day,
Yeah. As I said, the waiting is the thing. We've talked about this. We talked about the escape into the river, but again, here's one. I didn't buy it. That's why it's got Alamy written on it. But shout out to them so they don't pull us down. But this is the one from the rope bridge. You can see how much it's been absolutely destroyed here by the thing, and that's them climbing up and getting off it. So it's good that some VTS photographer managed to capture that for when they eventually went to court. And again, you've got it right here. The crazy thing, and I didn't say about it before, but in the River Kwai, there are there are venomous snakes. I don't know why I said violent. Maybe they were violent too. But they're venomous snakes, and they had anti-venom, vials upon vials of anti-venom on set every day, ready to inject the actors when they were in the water for so long, in case they got bitten. So they were going through their own personal Vietnam, I suppose, with all the things that they had to do, and with Cimino himself. Here's Cimino, as I said, he was actually on the helicopter. He was this guy. You could actually see him when he dropped him. And one of the lines that always sticks out to me on this escape scene is this bit here: "We don't belong here, Michael, in the jungle. Are we going home now?" The most interesting bit about this is you're going to see from Stephen later on when he's in the hospital. And Michael says, "I'm going to take you home." He says, "I don't want to go home." That's the change that we see in Stephen. Right now, he's gone back to being very innocent and puerile and childlike. And, it's really affected him. and he's begging to go home. When he gets back and he's had his legs amputated and everything, he's begging to not go home. He doesn't want them to see him like this. He's a different person. Lines that, as I said, Derek Washburn was just throwing in. Interesting story about Derek Washburn as well, by the way. When he finished this film, Cimino didn't seem to be super happy with it. He thought it was okay, and he said, "I think it's F off time, Derek," and he fired him. So he got fired before the making of the movie too. So Cimino was just going off firing everybody. This is the scene now that I think won Christopher Walken his Oscar. And when we talked about John Savage and the change in him, you can't talk about that without talking about the change in Nick and the character Nick. It won him the Best Supporting Actor. I've included a little bit from the script here, which is where this guy, this army doctor, I suppose you'd call him, or a nurse, comes over. And yeah, he's a doctor. He comes over and he starts asking questions of Nick, of Christopher Walken, and asks him if his name is Russian. And he says, "No, I'm American." And then he keeps talking to him. And to begin with, Nick can't answer. And Michael Cimino does a really good interview about this where he says, "I'm just off camera saying, don't talk, don't talk." And he's stopping him from being able to speak. So in the end, Chris Walken just broke down because he wasn't allowed to speak. And we actually see throughout this bit, and we spend a long time now. We spend about 15 to 20 minutes with Nick. Nobody else. We don't see Michael until the very end of this bit. We don't see John Savage until, later on. This is literally a time that we just hang with the character of Nick, with Christopher Walken, and we see this loss of identity. We see this guy who was dancing at the wedding and all laughing and singing "I love you, baby," and he was dancing around with a pool cue around his back. That's gone, right? This guy doesn't even know who his parents are. He can't even answer who his parents are, all right? All he knows is he's American because he feels offended that he keeps asking him if he's Russian, okay? And in the hospital as well, in the script, it says that he has on somebody else's dog tags, but it doesn't actually have that in the film. We don't notice that. But yeah, in the script, he's wearing somebody else's dog tags, who's from the bed next to him. And when he goes into Saigon, he meets up with, this shot here, we just put out silent. This shot here is
Love
typical
this shot.
Cimino. It's so good. We start off here, we've got all of the neons of Saigon, and it takes...
Chris, when you share the video, I think it slows your internet down.
It has done, yeah. Let me stop it though, right? But have I gone? Am I back?
I think you're back.
Did you lose me for a second there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think
that.
when you played the
won't do
video,
that.
Yeah.
I won't do that ever again, right? That's clearly YouTube and the powers that be that are coming from it. But yeah, I mean, I love that shot, and that's Cimino to a T. It starts off wide. We see this beautiful kind of vista of Saigon with all of these sort of neon lights everywhere, and then we just push in slowly, and it takes us 42 seconds to push in and eventually find Nick amongst it, this fresh-faced lad in his army uniform going out in Saigon having just got out of the hospital, and it just, if there's a way to show without telling, this is one man amongst the crowd, this is one man amongst the melee, there it is. And that's one of my favorite shots in any film ever. Like, I just love it. I would
so
pick
good.
it out. And it's done on other films, fair. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, Midnight Cowboy fans, they pick John Voight out in the midst of a crowd. I get it, right? But this, for some reason, it shows this isolation of Nick. And the same thing here. I mean, like, when he goes to the prostitute. Oh, should I not say that? I'll edit that one, Sweeney, too.
Well,
When he goes
Chris,
to the
can I
lady
say
of the
one
night.
thing about...
Yeah,
Can I
go on.
say one thing about that wide shot? Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, just because I know you're going to move on from it, but
No,
I
go for
love
it.
in that wide shot when you're trying to figure out what is happening. And near Christopher Walken, there's a cop that looks like he's arresting two soldiers. I don't know if you saw that when playing that back. And at least the first time that I watched it, I thought it was Christopher Walken was getting arrested by a cop in Saigon. There's like two individuals that looks like they're at least in a fight. It might not even be a cop arresting them, but I noticed that, and it just so I love those. Yeah,
I'll give that a watch because you may be right. And again, it gives me another opportunity to watch this film, which I don't need. I don't need convincing too much, But yeah, I mean, he makes his way to this this dive bar, I suppose we'll call it. You know what I mean? In Saigon, and meets this woman, and she says, "What do you want me? What do you want to call me?" And he says Linda, which is, remember, the name of Meryl Streep's character, the one that he's dancing with at the beginning, the one that's from Home. And she basically calls it out. You call me Linda just like Home, right? She knows there's guys who come in here, the soldiers come in here, and they want to call me after their sweethearts back home. You know what I mean? And it's this very much, he's losing everything about himself. He's losing everything about what he loved about Linda, about what he loved about home, everything. We are literally watching Nick losing his individuality as he identifies with these horrors that are around him. You know what I mean? Even the bit back in the hospital, that Russian American moment, it's like he's been alienated from his own country by being involved in this. You know what I mean? And I think there's a bit where he tries to make a phone call to Linda and he just puts the phone down. He can't, like, everything. We are watching this small blips about where Nick's going to disappear. And as he does, he becomes numb to everything. You know what I mean? And the best example of him becoming numb is when he happens across this. Like I suppose like the NFL of Russian roulette games. You know what I mean? Like what he's been forced to play in this prison camp is now like a mainstream kind of sport down a back alley of Saigon. You know what I mean? And he can't help but watch. You know what I mean? He becomes numb. We see his numbness right here to watching this. He's watching the game that he was part of. You know what I mean? And this is the point where I think he gives up on life. This is the point where he's been so traumatized by the war that he doesn't feel worthy of going back home. He doesn't want to go back home anymore. This is the point where he turns. And the line that I've picked out of the script there is, the camera closes on Nick, staring at the evolution of the game he once played for his life. He's bordering on obsession now. We feel a restlessness in his movements unlike anything we've seen before. That's it. And the wild thing about this scene, and I hope I've got it, is that Mike's there, right? And Michael is like standing watching as well, but with him, it's almost like he can't turn away from the Russian roulette either. He's got like a perverse fascination with it. You know what I mean? Like the horrors of war haven't affected him in the same way they've affected Nick. Maybe they have. But for me, it looked like he was being almost like a dark voyeur in this scene. He was standing watching and being a spectator. You know what I mean? And watching the game happen. He wasn't walking in and stopping it at this point. He was kind of perversely interested in it, I suppose. Was that your take, Sweeney, or am I wrong on that?
Yeah, how did
What's your
Michael
thoughts?
end up there? Was he looking for Nick at the time, or did he also stumble upon this himself? I can't remember.
I don't think so, because I think Nick goes there and Nick mistakes somebody else for Michael. And he goes, Michael? And then this guy turns around and it's not him. And it's like Nick's forgetting who people are now. That was the way I read it. And then Michael appears and sees Nick, but doesn't go over to him immediately. I think it's perhaps because he sees him at the Russian roulette game and he doesn't want to kind of go over and admit that he's been there as a spectator. So he just kind of hides out a little bit in the shadows. And then as Nick gets dragged off, he goes after him when Nick's played the game and gets dragged off and goes off in that little car, that little tuk-tuk or whatever it is. And he just runs out and sees him go. And that's the last time that Mike sees Nick until they're back playing against each other, you know?
I think what this sequence also does really well, and we obviously know that there's no accounts of the whole, Russian roulette aspect of this movie potentially being real and something that is fabricated. I mean, we know that it's fabricated, but what I still think it does a really good job is a look into what it was like, particularly to be an American soldier in Saigon in living in that city. And we know of the addiction, which ultimately plays into this film, as we get further into it. There was a lot that was happening, and I love the way that he kind of depicts this culture mixing between Western America that goes into Vietnam. And obviously they're shooting in Thailand, so, we're using our imaginations here, but I feel like that's what's so fascinating about the Vietnam War is the way we influence that part of the world in particular, especially during our time in those countries. I don't know. I always find it super fascinating. The Vietnam War is such a polarizing and highly discussed, time, especially in American history.
Well, people talk about this because they say like this was depicting an America that was kind of drunk on their success of World War II, okay, and was in this kind of happy honeymoon period. Happy honeymoon period is an awful way of putting it, but nobody be offended, right? But like from after World War II, they thought they could go into any war and win, or they'd never experienced the losing. America had never experienced the kind of shame that would come from a war like Vietnam, which is heartbreaking. You know what I mean? And this is kind of good at showing that, what it was like to come home from that, as opposed to coming home from World War II and the ticker tape parades and everybody loving you. You know what I mean? This was coming back from something that was, not a happy event. And I think that's something that it depicts it so well with Michael coming home in this sort of beginning to the third act, because we're now reaching this we've reached the midpoint. Now we're heading into the second half of the second act, into the third act, when Michael comes home, when they go for another hunt, and finally when he goes and meets Stephen. And like, what interests me with Michael Cimino with this film is it never goes back and shows a scene that's already gone past. It never goes back and shows us, like what's been lost or anything like that. There's no way to restore that sense of innocence that we've already lost. Those characters that were joyful at the start, that were all hugging each other and calling each other names and joking around and throwing, food at each other and all that kind of stuff, it's gone. They are different people now. And Michael is the perfect example of that. And we don't realize, that it's changed until it's already happened. We can't go back. We don't have any flashbacks, And as Cimino said, trauma affects individuals differently. And that's what we're seeing in this second half of the film. Okay, it reshapes relationships, it fractures others, it alters group dynamics. And Michael is the most interesting because he returns and has this kind of inner strength to face, what is a torture in itself, going home. But he suffers greatly inside. He's able to bear it. He's able to hold these things on his shoulders and not let anybody else realize. But then he sees, the friends and the loved ones waiting for him, and the welcome party. And in fact, if you remember, it's before this, it's like he's in a taxi and he just tells it to drive on. He doesn't want anything to do with it. In fact, he sneaks in through the back door in the end. He's the only one of the three friends to come back from Vietnam so far. You know what I mean? He's the only one who's come back physically unscathed, should I say, because I think that Stephen comes back around about this time as well. As I said, he goes in through the back door. You know what I mean? And I think that we've seen the isolation of Nick. Now we're seeing the isolation of Michael, and that's what Cimino does so well. He started, if you remember, that first act, all five together. They're all here. And now we've seen all of them splinter. They were even together, like when they're in the hut together. There were three of them still together in that that Vietnamese water prison. Now they've all gone off separately, and we're now just looking in on each of their lives and the way that they've been affected by war, how the trauma is affecting them. Starting with Michael, and yeah, that's something. Again, when we see scenes like this where he goes around to Stephen's wife's house and the kid's got a gun pointing at him, he's holding it in, but you can imagine that this is a very symbolic scene. It's absolutely shocking, you know what I mean, as to what this moment. And this moment here where he goes and sees Stephen's wife and she can't speak. Again, it's Cimino using that technique of saying, don't say anything. I want you to just look at him. I want you to just sit knitting or doing whatever she's doing with her hands. And I don't want you to say anything. Cimino adopted this technique a lot, where it was like, it's better to say nothing and to see you struggling to find the words than it is to actually give you words to say, And I think this is one of her best, the best parts of the film is her not being able to speak, having seen her laughing and joking at the wedding. We've seen the impact that it's had on her, and the impact that it's had on Linda as well. The impact that it's had on Linda. She obviously, they had this kind of eyes meeting in the wedding and everything like this, even though she was dancing with Nick, and now he won't even stay with her in the trailer that Nick owned because he don't feel right. It's like he's got all this stuff going on inside. They don't even sleep together. He just falls asleep on the bed, And the second time, the other thing that we see now, I'm just moving through it, Brendan. So if you want to jump in at any point, let me know. But
yeah,
this this is the point that always hits me the most with John Cazale. And people say, by the way, there's always this myth that goes around that they were asking for live ammo on set or anything like this. I don't know. I researched it. I didn't see any examples of anybody from set talking about that. It felt like it was just some kind of urban myth that went round. However, John Cazale is in his last few weeks of life, and this is a very powerful moment where Michael sort of spins the chamber and puts one bullet in. And if there were to be a scene where that would happen, this would be more likely it. But again, I can't see it happening on a film set, even as crazy as Cimino is and as much as he loves realism. If that went wrong, I don't think, like, we're talking about something worse than The Crow or any other movie where something's gone wrong. That's a pretty harrowing to have on set. I can't imagine it. I can't imagine live ammo ever being on a set, first of all.
I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be. But what I love so far, Chris, and what you've been speaking to is just this concept of the war coming home. Even though they've left, the battlefield, the war still continues, but now in a completely different capacity. And when you look at the structure of this movie with the camaraderie, the community, the friendship, what ultimately happened in that middle film that changed the dynamic and reordered the structure of this community, the culture, the friendship, in seeing Robert De Niro's character, Mike, ultimately reemerge. And like you said, he did not want to stop and be faced with this celebration for the gruesome acts that ultimately played out in front of him and with his closest companions, Nick and Steve. And ultimately they come back into this story. But he does this really awesome kind of just, and almost in a similar way to how Full Metal Jacket is, but this is two parts. This shows the cause and the effect, right? They're playing with these things. The effect of the war lingers far beyond the events itself and where they were in the world. And you see that as this character has to reestablish his life and also the life of his absent friend, which you ultimately see play out through this third act. And it's really simple. Like, at the core of this movie, even though it's grappling with so much, and I think it's really awesome if you did see Session 2 with Eyes Wide Shut, which is trying to put so much in the subtext. Cimino, while there's still so much to say in the subtext of this movie, the context of the events around it make it such an easy film to understand the agony of what's ultimately playing out with these characters that did go to war. And I think it's a great example of, like, I think some people put a lot on subtext, and subtext is so important, but also being able to have a very great piece of story that's operating for what you consume first. This is an amazing way to do that.
Yeah, I'd agree entirely. And I'd say as well, like, look at the way that it's broken down. Look at the way that Cimino is able to show us this solitude. You know what I mean? This is the place, like right here on this second hunt. They go for a second hunt, and on this one, for anybody who doesn't know, this is where it's actually described in as Michael loses his ability to hunt. I think in the script it's something like that. Michael loses his ability to hunt, and it's true. He reaches this point where he's got one shot. Remember, the one shot. This is the guy. When you go deer hunting, we have this beautiful choral music. This is the thing that follows him. And in fact, at this moment here, Stanley Myers, who's the guy who wrote the soundtrack, his whole orchestration opens up. Like, we're building up to this moment where he's going to fire the gun, and he doesn't do it. He sort of moves away, or he shoots upwards, and he doesn't hit the book. Deliberately shoots away, and then leaps. And I think that is the most metaphorical and symbolic telling that we can have in this whole film. Michael has lost this ability to do the thing that he loves more than anything. He's drifted so far away from his friends, he nearly shoots one in the face to play the games. You know what I mean? And yeah, he's become this person that, this is a guy who wanted to live in the mountains. He wanted to do all these things. And now Michael can't even do that. He can't even enjoy the thing that he said he wanted to do for the rest of his life to Nick earlier on. The person that remember, this guy wanted to go off and hunt on his own. That was the thing he told Nick he wanted to do more than anything. And now we have him doing it, and he can't do it anymore. You know, it is a
Mhm.
massive change. And speaking of massive change, we now look at Stephen, and this is where we find out about Nick, and that Nick's still alive, and he's sending money from the Russian roulette games. And again, I bring you back to the line, Michael, I don't want to go home. Stephen has changed irrevocably. And one of the things, so my wife works at the AFI, and they have lots of archives with all these ancient, I say not ancient, very old film stuff. You know, it's not ancient. It's not like 2,000 years old. But all these old film things, and they have stuff from like I think I've got it down here, the Coppola, Lifetime Achievement Award things and stuff like that. And when they had Robert De Niro for a Lifetime Achievement Award with the AFI, he said that this scene with John Savage, who plays Stephen, this scene right here, when he's pushing him around, he said it was the hardest thing he's ever had to film. It's the hardest thing he's ever had to get through, and perhaps the sort of like the character of Born on the 4th of July, the Tom Cruise one, was based around this kind of thing, because John Savage, again, he's become just so removed from everything, like when they're talking on the phone, he's trying to say, oh yeah, oh, it's great, it's like a holiday camp here and everything like that. It's blatantly not, and it's this VA hospital that they've all gone to and stuff like that. And then we move back, like now Mike knows what he's got to do. He's got to go back for Nick. He promised him he wouldn't leave him alone. He promised him he wouldn't leave him out there. So as soon as he finds out that Nick is sending this money back for Stephen, because he obviously feels guilty, then Mike goes back to the Saigon underworld. And there's a lot of little bits in there where he meets up with this French guy who takes him half the way, and then he charges him $5,000 to get in and stuff like this. But this is where we have this, again, cool GIF. Great GIF. Am I right, Brennan?
Great GIF. Awesome
Great
GIF.
GIF. In fact,
I mean, I
you can
just
see how
love
they cut
the
these
setting.
guys out.
Yeah.
It's mesmerizing. I mean, what a shot. And then we also have this same shot, by the way, from above, and it looks absolutely amazing. And I don't think I captured that one. No, I didn't. I just had this. Right, but there's a shot of it from sort of like a 10-degree angle looking down, and it is a beautiful, it's like, oh, it's so well done. But I love the fact that we have this absolute melee going on around him. And although this is a GIF, so somebody's just chopped this out and stuck it, they literally aren't moving, De Niro walks in and stands and says, Nicky, what are you doing? And all this kind of stuff. And Nick doesn't recognize him at all. And everybody else is moving around. They're betting. They're all high-fiving each other and everything like this. Like they're watching a sport, like they're watching the Super Bowl. And right here is just very, very still. They don't have anything to do with it. And eventually, De Niro sits down and says, I want to play the American. I want to bet against the American. And this is where we have the pivotal moment. And one thing, by the way, you'll never see a red bandana on De Niro. That was only put on for the poster. So he doesn't actually put a red bandana on. And my final bit, Brendan, before I throw to you, is this bit. It's this bit that's from the script. And as I said, I read the script after my third viewing. So not long ago, maybe about 6-7 years ago, and loved it. And that's why I've included it in this, because it is something that's poignant. It's this bit where Nick doesn't recognize Michael. He studies his face with a blank detachment of one stranger eyeing another, pale, exhausted, yet imposing and appealing. Michael leans in closer towards him, stops. He doesn't know, we don't know, what he is going to do. Nick, it's me, it's Mike. And he actually says to him at one point, what's the matter with you? And that's a line that Nick says earlier on when they go on their first deer hunt, and he's picking on John Cazale's character. And again, Nick makes no reply, staring at him like someone watching it rain. And this is the moment. And what did he say? What's his last line? What's Nick's last line? Do you remember?
I don't. Oh, yeah. It's what he... Yeah, one shot. Yeah.
One shot. One shot, remember. You are hunting a deer. And this is the deer.
The cinematography, so good.
It's mesmerizing. 35 mil, 235 to 1. Yeah. And absolutely stunning. And then finally, Brendan, I'll finish off with this. We finish with God Bless America. Cimino described this final scene where they all sit around after Nick's funeral. And again, Metal Gear Solid is there. He's in his beret. And Cimino said this final scene is a moment of communion. People who are spiritually sick coming together to do something collectively. It is a shared sound that reunites them. And that shared sound is the song God Bless America. And it's not about America, he said. He said, this isn't a dig at America. This is about belonging. It's something that everybody has sung in school and throughout their lives. You Americans, you know it better than I do. Like, this is the song that everybody knows, and it's just something that brings them together to finish off.
Yeah.
And finally, he says, here's to Nick.
So
And
good.
thus
And it
ends
is
the best film I've ever seen. One of.
definitely one of the best movies. And what I feel like this scene got a lot of slack because even at the time, the reception of this movie when it came out, a lot of the veterans did not like it. They didn't love the portrayal of how Cimino spoke to war, and really was the Russian roulette sequence just not actually contributing to anything factual for the film. And then I think that a lot of people took that ending as this overt patriotism, like you were saying, this almost like a lot of people looked at the movie at the time, to my understanding, from what I've heard, is that it was a very like Republican kind of forced patriotic themes, that you blood by the you die by the flag kind of ending. But Cimino didn't want it to actually be that. And what you said is this song, this almost language that they could all share at this time of grief, ultimately, with what happened with Nick. It was the song that is partially representative of where they live and who they are, is this empirical power. But what they all have in their DNA, and this binding concept of being an American citizen and being able to sing that song, that especially at that time, even more than now, likely, people did know super well. And I think Cimino, that was a place where he operated with such a poignant ending, as we see these characters go through every stage of this film to leave in this final communal moment. I thought it worked really well. And yeah, there's so much that ultimately plays out in this film, but I love what he's able to speak to community, especially at that time, and what we've potentially lost in a lot of modern society. You don't see community operating in the very same manner, and a lot of it was due to the dismantling of having these central places to meet, being a church, as we all became less religious. You know, Nietzsche spoke to that with God is dead, not to celebrate the concept of God actually being dead, but speaking to, as we all remove ourselves from religion, that is the collapse of society, because it's what brought us together. And in this film, speaking to that from the American perspective, it's us kind of living to be an American. It's a very unique world that we live in. It's the Wild West, you know. It's always been wild.
I'm reminded, in a film sense, I'm reminded of like this. Just I think even just today, I was reading Roger Deakins was saying everybody makes the same film nowadays. Films have already been told. You know what I mean? I think he said literally that line, and it made him sad for the future of cinema. When you look back to a film like this, which is whatever 1977, you know, Cimino said the best way to make a personal film is to accept studio money and quietly make your own film. Right? And that's exactly what he did. Right? This film was not engineered by committee. This didn't have executive producers getting involved and writing their own version or saying you couldn't do this. I mean, it did, but he stopped it. And what we're seeing here is Cimino on a plate. You know, it wasn't developed by focus groups. It wasn't developed by, you know, group grope, as we've talked about in the past. It exists because Michael Cimino forced this into existence through his conviction, through his storytelling, through just stubbornness, and through refusing to accept anything else. And the reason why this has stood the test of time, and it really is one of the best films I think ever made, right, is because of that reason. This was a singular man who was saying, I know exactly how we do this. It wasn't even meant to be about Vietnam. It wasn't even meant to be about 5 blokes. It was one man who was playing Russian roulette in Vegas. And look what we ended up with. That's Michael Cimino. And yeah, I mean, I started off showing, you know, advertisements, things like that. But this was a guy who, again, in those advertisements, he indulged in Americana. He was showing what America was like. He loved America. You know what I mean? He needed to show it for what it was. He needed to show it in a documentary-like style. And he did it with this film. And yeah, I mean, Heaven's Gate, you're right. He flew too close to the sun. He ruined United Artists. he took the whole industry down after this. But for this moment, it was one of the greatest things. Like even Tarantino says it, and people like or dislike Tarantino, but it was probably the greatest film ever made at the moment that it was made, and it has influenced so many others.
Yeah, and he ultimately went on to win Best Picture, and this gave him a lot of credibility. It was this director who, prior to this, directed one movie. It was nominated. It ended up winning 5 Oscars. I'm pulling it up. It won Best Picture, Best Actor in Leading Role for Robert De Niro, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Christopher Walken, Best Actress in a Supporting Role for Meryl Streep, and then Best Director for Michael Cimino. And then he
Not best
was nominated.
cinematography.
It was nominated. I don't know who won that year. I would be curious to look into that. It was also nominated for Best Writing Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Sound, and then Best Film Editing. So it was nominated for what? That's 9 Oscars, won 5. Ultimately,
I'm blown away that cinematography and sound didn't get anything, because the sound design, if you go back through it, and I'm certain there'll be people who will do this. I'm amazed that there isn't an article out there right now, but somebody on Instagram will eventually do this who's a sound designer, because there's lots of cool ones out there doing stuff. I messaged one just today to tell them that I thought that his content was great, which I'll do regularly. And if anybody thinks our content's great, feel free to message us. But like, somebody will do something about the sound design of this movie, because it is exceptional. You know what I mean? Just unbelievably done. Yeah.
Oh, you know who won Best Cinematography? Best Nestor Almendros for Days of Heaven. Let's just like...
You love your Terrence Malick.
Dude, I love Terrence Malick. I mean, just looking at that year for Best Director, he was up against Woody Allen for Interiors, Hal Ashby for Come Home, Warren Beatty and Buck Henry for Heaven Can't Wait, and Alan Parker for Midnight Express. And,
Midnight Express was a good one.
Oh my God, yeah. And looking at, let's see, Best Picture, Homecoming by Jerome Hellman. I haven't seen that. Heaven Can Wait by Warren Beatty. Then we have Midnight Express, and An Unmarried Woman was also
Dude, Midnight Express was the only one that could hold a candle to this. Like Midnight Express.
I don't think I've ever seen that. I'll have to check that out.
It's great. It's all about drug trafficking, and this guy goes to Turkey. Oh, it's great. And it's got this really cool soundtrack that's like dugga dugga dung dugga 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 dung. Oh, it's brilliant. It's all electronic. Yeah. Midnight Express is great, but again, there's a documentary about that. I think it's on Tubi, actually, if anybody wants to watch it. And it's all about the making of that movie, because again, it was made on bullshit. They lied about everything. The whole book was lied. Everything was like the guy who wrote it all, who wrote about himself as the main character. He lied. It all gets outed as they're making the movie, but they just carry on anyway. You know, these were very unique stories in that they didn't have a semblance of reality in half of them. You know,
I have to check that out. And I just saw here that Vilmos Zsigmond won the year before with Close Encounter. This dude was already, and you were speaking to that earlier in this session here, that I mean, this dude was literally on an absolute like streak. I mean, all of the filmmakers were at this time. This movie just is so emblematic of the 1970s, and closing out that chapter where we had these larger than life excessive productions. And unfortunately, Heaven's Gate essentially brought what was by and large the American auteur period to a close, as we slowly shifted into this different way of having these committee run productions. And don't get me wrong, there were still massive motion pictures that ultimately came out after Heaven's Gate. It's not like that completely disrupted the concept of a blockbuster, but it definitely had a different perspective of what it meant to control the box office. And we saw that as we went into movies like Jurassic Park, The Dark Knight, the Harry Potter movies. There were still massive productions being done, but the way in which that directors were able to do in the 70s and ultimately early 80s of just getting these blank checks and being able to do what they want, hold the film hostage, be able to advocate for themselves. Michael Cimino on it essentially kind of closed and redefined that chapter for a lot of filmmakers to come. And that's the unfortunate truth about Cimino. While he's this amazing filmmaker and genius, some you could also say he's the reason why the industry ultimately changed away from director driven productions, by and large,
Yeah.
I would say. So it's the tale of flying too close to the sun. And we're definitely going to one day do a whole breakdown on Heaven's Gate, because that movie alone further lays the groundwork for what Michael Cimino was, as this seminal figure that was more than just a director. Even the way that Kubrick was, like, these filmmakers were more than just directors. They were taking artistry from all different mediums and putting them into the pot to be able to express to them. And he talked about that with movies. He said there was just nothing like the art of filmmaking in the way it can
No.
tell and speak to humanity and society and what was ultimately going on in the world, and the way our culture was shifting. And so much in the Deer Hunter speaks to a very specific time in American history and the global history. And yeah, I think he was just one of the best for being able to use film as a vessel to dissect this type of conflict, and the way men and women were afflicted with trauma and what that looked like on a purely just communal level. It's impressive.
Yeah.
And I think
I mean,
that's what's, yeah, go for it.
PTSD had never been shown in film before,
Yeah.
had it? This was it,
Yeah.
right? I don't mean to interrupt you on that, but like that's crazy that this is
Maybe
like the
Paths
first.
of
And
Glory was like the earliest of maybe
true.
having some type of hardship as you saw them going through the trench. But again, it was not a lot of the casualty outside of war like this shows.
It's amazing. As I said, like there is a lot, like, well, and as you said, there's a lot that we can talk about with Cimino. And
Yeah.
I hope that this inspires people to go back and watch that film, and even watch Heaven's Gate, because I think it's still paying off its debts. But
And all of his movies got re-released in 4K. I mean, there was a massive push. I want to say it was 2012 Venice Film Festival or something like that when they re-released it, for Heaven's Gate. It got a standing ovation. I think that's the interesting thing with Cimino's work, is that it stands the test of time. He was doing things that even other filmmakers who went on to have more prolific careers, like the Coppolas and the Scorseses. In my opinion, what's so fascinating about his work is he just operated in a completely different perspective and wanting to have this authenticity, and the way his films feel so 3D. And he was really object to be able to looking at film as a 2D medium, whether it was storyboards or, the way he operated was always using the medium to its fullest capacity. And he remarked that. We talked about it. He compared himself against the film school filmmakers. He was like, what I like is the ignorance is bliss. And we talked about that with Orson Welles when you were over here. He spoke so well to that when he was making his films early on in his career. It's nice to not know. Yeah.
Yeah. He basically said ignorance was my greatest tool. It was my greatest asset, because I was able to say, I want the shot to do this. And if I had been at film school, I wouldn't have even tried that, because they'd have told me why I couldn't do it or why that shot wasn't able to be made. Whereas I told that to Greg Toland, who was my cinematographer, my DP, and he knew exactly, or he figured out a way to do it. So we were doing shots that had never been conceived of before, because I was able to sit there ignorantly and say, it should look like this. And we just had to find a way to do it, because that was what was being spoken in my mind. So when Orson Welles became the director of Citizen Kane and became the Oscar-winning director of Citizen Kane, and this, he did something unheard of. It's because he was bringing stuff from plays and bringing stuff from, how he saw it from his mind's eye. That's the way we've got to be. Like, I think Cimino even said it. I spoke to you the other day, and Cimino said something where he said, if I'd gone to film school, I wouldn't have made this film.
Yeah.
And it's that. And it's not disrespecting film school students. I know lots of people have been to film school and everything like that. But the saddest thing is what it drums into you sometimes is the lack of creative freedom that you could have. You know what I mean? And it stops you from just thinking completely with abandon like a child. I think that's something that we need to get back. I'm 39 years old right now. I know you're in your 30s now, Brendan. I'm sorry for interrupting you on that and telling everybody your age, right? But you still look like you're in your 20s, right? But like, I want to reclaim that thing of being a kid and being able to just draw up ideas, Scorsese used to do it. He used to draw his own storyboards when he was like 11 years old and 8 years old and stuff like this. And they've come to light. I think one of them is called like The Eagles of Rome or something. And it's fabulous. He's drawn up his own sort of Roman epic in storyboards when he was a kid. Those are shots that he could dream up from here and not think about, you know, whether the camera could do them or whether the camera could pull it off. You know, that's what we need to get back to, because, I mean, people are doing it now with AI, but we don't want that. We want to be able to do it reality. You know, we want to be able to use mastery and craft to do that properly with cameras, you know?
Yeah.
And that's,
I think it's...
yeah,
Go for
Go
it.
on, buddy.
Yeah.
Oh,
I was just
I
going to
was gonna
say
say-
that I think we have a delay, but I was just going to say I think that's what's so brilliant about Cimino as just a director, and what I want to see more of is directors that are hands-on. Not that there aren't brilliant directors operating today, but Cimino is a man that could see his vision in his head and apply that through leadership, or even in his case, more likely just forcing a square peg through a circle hole and just making it happen. And I love that about this, especially this era of directing. Filmmaking was very much a craft, and I think we can return to that in the way that Nolan does it. You know, he shows the craftsmanship, or Ryan Coogler, or whoever it is. I mean, all the best, like the best nominated directors this year, the nominated and for Best Picture, they're all just amazing filmmakers, and I love seeing this tradition. Let's bring back more director-driven productions. I think it's super important, and that doesn't mean you have to go completely off the edge like Cimino did, but yeah, I think it's super important.
Yeah, I mean, that DGA talk that I went to, as I said, to bring it back full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning. It's almost like we planned it, Brendan, right? But like that DGA talk, hearing people like PTA talk about what he does when he first arrives on set, and I think all of them agreed. The one thing that they all said, absolutely, all five, I want to go to where the camera is. As soon as I get on set, I want to go to where the camera is and see what it's pointed at. I want to know why we're not rolling already. You know, like Werner Herzog said it. You know, a film set is the first thing you do on a film set is throw a chair in the middle of the room and shoot from 10 different angles.
Yeah.
You know, the craziest one was this, and I love this one. Guillermo del Toro was talking about how they went and they were doing location scouts. Okay, and he said they wanted to find things that were like 1700s. Okay, that was the era for Frankenstein. So he was doing location scouts for Frankenstein. And he said the only place they could find in Northern England was the same place that Kubrick had shot for Barry Lyndon. Okay, so they went to the same location to shoot Frankenstein's house that was the house used in Barry Lyndon. Okay, and he said, we walked around, and he said, I like to walk around and see if I can find the shot first thing in the morning. I like to go and see how we can do it and all this kind of stuff. And Guillermo says Kubrick always picks the best angle. So he said the only angle that we could use was the exact same angle in the Barry Lyndon house that Kubrick has used. So if you watch Frankenstein, there is a shot by Dan Laustsen, ASC, hopefully, you know, well, I think he's Oscar nominated, right? Who has literally done the exact same shot as in Barry Lyndon, same distance, same everything, and it's of the painting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and
that's at the older gentleman's house, and like the later in the story when they're in
yes, I think so. It's got the painting on the wall, and there's like a character in the bottom corner, and the only difference between that and the Barry Lyndon shot is the character in the bottom corner is different. That's it.
Oh wow,
it's mesmerizing.
That's awesome.
You know, like it was one of the best chats. And I'd say this as well as a final. P.T. Anderson talks about shots that he's happened across, which are definitely stolen shots, and you get this sense that he's a guy who just wants to grab the camera and just go with it and see what he can do, you know. And his comments were exceptional, like listening to him talk about things. And I've spoken to other ADs who've worked with him who've said he likes to try and steal a shot every now and again, and you know, be an adventurous director.
Absolutely. And someone actually just dropped in the comments here, Chris, that in the same year, and this is what Hal Ashby was actually nominated for, Coming Home. Have you seen that movie by him? I have not seen this. It was in 1960.
And I'm kind of guilty that I haven't. Yeah.
It's essentially another film that deals with PTSD. It's about a husband who's a Marine officer fighting in Vietnam, in love with a former high school classmate who suffered a paralyzing combat injury in war. So there was 2 films that year. One,
Whoa.
this looks a lot different. This has John Voight and Jane Fonda, Bruce Stearns in it. Different perspective at Vietnam, but kind of grapples with some similar themes.
Great comment. Thank you so much for making that. I wouldn't have known. So, but I will give Coming Home a watch now. Definitely.
Yeah, it looks awesome.
Yeah, guys. But this has been an amazing chat, and I love this. And I think that the next one that we're going to do is going to be we're going to just go a little bit more onto a few films that we kind of want to kind of recommend and just talk about kind of our recs and things. Maybe even talk a little bit about Oscars, right, Brendan?
Yeah, so for this next one, as Chris was saying, we want to pick maybe 6 movies that every cinephile should watch. So we're still going to be doing this format from time to time where we do these dissertation deep dives from start to finish and into the background. But we always want to mix up these chats and also give you guys more recommendations to be able to like spend the time in between these sessions every week to watch cinema. That is the goal. So for this next one, instead of focusing on one movie, Chris and I might bring 3 films each and just kind of do an overview of why this is a movie that you should not miss. This could be everything from big name titles like Jaws to obscure like Spanish movies. We want to just be able to speak to cinema that you guys should know and spend the time just to be able to watch when you guys have the chance. That's the beauty of the Film Hang. And we're going to be trying out these different formats of conversation. But again, this is the biggest core. This is like what we want to try to do at least twice a month is where we really nail down on movies. And so far we've done Amadeus, which was awesome. That was session 1, which is out now on our YouTube and on the Filmmakers Academy platform. Last week, we did a 4-hour tour de force on Eyes Wide Shut. That is an amazing dissection of Stanley Kubrick's final film. And now we have The Deer Hunter, largely what is one of my favorite films of the 70s and probably one of the best directors, in my opinion, to have ever done it. And now we want to be able to spend the time and ring off a couple of them now that we're getting closer to the Oscars. We do have a couple of movies that we want to do a deep dive on, which I'm super excited to announce as we get closer. But yeah, we hope that this is an awesome time for everyone. We really appreciate, we've had people on this since the beginning on Super Bowl Sunday. That is dedication, shows your love for cinema. Absolutely. And we're going to continue to do this, and make sure to like follow us on Instagram at The Film Hang. This is something Chris and I are super passionate about and growing. And if you don't know about Filmmakers Academy, highly recommend check us out. We're all about online education, things like this, but actually discussing the practical nature of making a film and what film production looks like, especially from the cinematography perspective. And tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard, every Monday, I do what is called office hours. And I actually have some office hours member that joins this. And that is a place, if whether you're an FA member or not, you do not have to have, you do not need to have a membership to join this. But for those that are looking to find community as a filmmaker, a creative, talk cinema, talk your latest project, maybe you want to know what your first step could be. These are unrecorded calls, and we're always looking to be able to take the conversations we have today, bring them into tomorrow, and continue the conversation in a manner just to continue growing community. So make sure to check out Filmmakers Academy. We do a lot of awesome stuff every week, and we are going to be coming back next Sunday, 7 p.m. And Chris, I feel like we had an awesome job. And this is honestly, Chris put a lot of time into this presentation, and it was super awesome being able to just hear you break down this movie so eloquently and speaking to the themes. And I hope those that have seen the film, you guys get to go back and watch it with a renewed perspective. I know I will.
Yeah, totally. And it's fun to do. I mean, like we've said it all from the beginning, and we Brendan. The reason we did this is because we love film. And like we do. We absolutely can sit and watch film all day, every day, and we'd love to do that. I'd love to just chuck it on. And I put films on when I work. I put them on in the background. If you ever, like Scorsese said once, TCM, put it on in the background. You've got all these old black and whites, or you can have any kind of movie. Put Tubi on. Tubi's great for all old movies. And just put them on, right? And just work with them on. And you will experience them in certain different ways. And there'll be points where you're working, there'll be points where you're watching them. And if you're like me, you might get distracted by watching them. But it's the best thing to do. And it's the one great thing that I can truly say I love doing. And I love chatting to Brendan about films. And I love just coming on here and talking. And if anybody's got different opinions about film, and disagrees with us, do it. I want you to. Like, we've watched the same film, but films are subjective. You know what I mean? Like, we can both have a different experience about a film. You might hate a film. That's fine. Tell us what we should watch instead. Tell us what films you think are better. Like, just talk to us, because we love talking film, and I will keep doing it as long as I can, because I love it.
We had some people say that they want to see us do Das Boot. We could definitely talk about that.
Ooh,
Good old
yeah.
Wolfgang.
And
I
link
would
it
love to do that.
to Crimson Tide by Tony Scott, and we can have like how they shot to show the interior of the submarine in totally different ways to make them feel compressed and very claustrophobic, because I've got stories about that. So yeah, Das Boot, definitely. And
there's a ton of movies, even just to like roll out a few that I know I'm excited to talk about over this next year. Ad Astra, super controversial. A lot of people don't love that movie, but I honestly love that film, and I've thought about it ever since it released back in 2019. I also want to do another Kubrick. I'm really trying to be cognizant of not having back-to-back director films, but I would love to do Full Metal Jacket, another take on Vietnam. Potentially my favorite take of Vietnam, or potentially my favorite movie of all time. I'll admit that. I love Full Metal Jacket. That movie has impacted me and taught me so much about cinema, and getting the chance to watch that with my father and his experience in relation to that film. I know that's one that I really want to watch and just be able to speak to. I want to do more than anything in Andrei Tarkovsky, but I think the pinnacle of what I want to speak to, which we're going to work towards, I think this is a really big one to try to grapple first, is speaking to Krzysztof Kieslowski's Decalogue. I love that more than anything. Potentially my favorite piece of cinema as a collection in individual stories, and in which he operated to be able to tell that. What films do you want to speak to over the course of this year?
Do you know what? Let me just say this before I do that, right? Brendan has introduced me to cinema that I've never even thought about. When I go round to his house, there'll be points where we will he'll go, "Oh, do you want to have a coffee?" And then before we know it, he's over by his massive DVD rack that he's got. He's got a massive rack. and
it's a big one.
And he'll pick a DVD out and we'll chuck it on. He'll, "Oh, have you ever seen this? Have you ever seen that?" One time it was like Michael Haneke's Funny Games. And again, phenomenal movie that messes you up inside, but is brilliantly messing you up. And Sweeney told me about that. But like, yeah, when he says Krzysztof Kieslowski and he talks about Decalogue, at first I was like, oh yeah, like proper film schooly kind of like answer. But honestly, not the case at all. I watched it right after he told me about it. And then I went on to watch Trois Colors, Rouge, Blue, and White. Three Colors trilogy that he did. Phenomenal director. And as I said, like, it'll change you just watching it, just putting it on. It's a vastly different type of cinema. In the same way, Bella Tarr. I think I started watching Bella Tarr because Brendan told me about it, and then from there I was watching Kieran Oz, Workmeister. You lent me your copy of Workmeister Harmonies, and yeah, it is just, if you give it a chance, it's phenomenal. Another one that he introduced me to was Victoria Reese. And I'd seen one that was called Spirit of the Beehive, which I loved, and it's actually got the train scene where they put their heads down on the train track, which is also in Inception, and everybody thinks that Nolan came up with it from a different thing. I'm fairly certain Nolan took that one from Spirit of the Beehive, but he did another one called El Sur, which Brendan introduced me to, which is wow, just great cinema that I've not experienced before. So listening to his recommendations is one of my favorite things to do, because I will write them down and I will watch them. And you can get them, as I said, you can get some of them on streaming. You can get other ones in the Criterion Collection. Other ones you can order online, or you can even watch on like Mubi or some of those ones. But it's great. They are really great recommendations. I mean, Brendan, I want to talk about Once Upon a Time in the West, Sergio Leone. You know what I mean? Man with No Name, like that shot, that film, and the way that they did the shot at the train station, and the way that they did the shot where he's walking along and we have this kind of tracking shot and we eventually see his face and it's Charles Bronson, and the other one where he lifts his hat up and we actually see it's Henry Fonda, not Peter Fonda, right? Phenomenal scene. Yeah, phenomenal film. So that's one I desperately want to talk about, because I think that, like, old westerns, don't get me wrong, they're loved by people like Tarantino and stuff like that, but that one was just another world, just a totally different one. In the same way, we're talking about space movies. First Man, Chazelle.
I have that right
Blew
on my
me
table right now
away.
to rewatch.
Oh.
I've only seen that movie
Oh.
once at the time it released. I need to revisit that and Babylon. Those are two films that I have I keep a stack of movies on my coffee table that are like next up. And I'm big into physical media if you don't know that about me. I believe that that is the best way to watch a movie. Don't get me wrong. I like streaming. I think it does make things more convenient and it is accessible. But to me, what I've noticed, one, I love the quality of physical media. The tangibility of the medium itself, I think, makes it want me to consume film more readily. And that's always been super help of trying to organize my watch list physically is something that's been super big. And I'm super old school. I don't use Letterbox. I love IMDb. I know people love Letterbox, which is totally fine. I see the appeal, but I love not having everything have a social media component to it. And that's one thing I really like about IMDb is I don't see what Chris loves. And I'm very competitive when it comes to movies. So I think it's better for me not to have the preconception of others before I watch a film because it can easily distinguish, which is a shortcoming of my own that I've always been aware of as a cinephile. But one movie that I think is even maybe at the top of my list more than most, and it's a more contemporary film, 2016's Martin Scorsese's, in my opinion, potentially his last masterwork. I love The Irishman. I love Killers of the Flower Moon. But Silence is a career-defining piece of cinema for me. And I think getting the chance to speak to that movie, one, how impactful it was to me. One, the very personal perspective that Scorsese put into that film, considering where he was earlier in his life and how long he's been trying to make that motion picture. That movie, if you have not seen Silence, definitely put that on your list because we are going to watch that coming up and we are going to talk about it on the Film Hang. We have an awesome list. We have, like I said, there's new movies. Not everything's going to be from 50 years ago.
No,
but that movie,
Scorsese Sunday. I love that.
Yeah, we might even do one that's not even out because we'll get to see it before everybody. You know what I mean? I'm just kidding. We're not at that level, but you guys could if you like and subscribe to the channel. We could actually get invited to a film that's not out yet. So make sure to do that.
We'll all go and hang and watch a Scorsese movie. I like that idea.
We do want to do in-person events for those that are in Los Angeles. We have one percolating potentially, so keep an eye out for that. That is for the LA cinephiles. We do want to start bringing these conversations in personable in a manner that's not so online because cinema is meant to be shared. But for my final movie that I want to put on here that I really would love to speak to, and I know that you were on the same level for this, is The Conversation by Francis Ford Coppola, which is honestly my favorite Coppola movie. I love that more than The Godfather, than Apocalypse Now. If you have not seen The Conversation, it is a perfect 10. I rewatched it this year with Kira, and she was also blown away. The level of paranoia, and that is Coppola's only directed, produced, and written film that he did himself. Very personal movie for Coppola, which I also think is super fascinating because all of his other productions, he had a lot more collaborators in those departments, but this one was essentially lifted and produced in the way that Megalopolis or whatever was, but this was a far better film.
Megalopolis was an interesting situation, mate, honestly. When I saw that in cinema, it was one of the craziest experiences I've ever had in the cinema with the audience. After walking out, people standing with their arms folded at the bottom of the stairs. But yeah, you're right, the conversation is amazing. And Gene Hackman, R.I.P.
Rest in peace, dude.
One of his best. Yeah. We should definitely do a Hackmanathon with all the, Royal Tenenbaums was awesome too. He smashed it.
Yeah, and to all of our viewers, if you guys have movies that you want us to watch, make sure to submit them in the community or throw them to us in a DM. And if you have a different format, we want this to be fun. We want to bring in some guests and stuff eventually to be able to grow out these conversations weekly. So, Chris, I think we did an awesome job clocking in short of 3 hours, everyone. Another deep dive dissertation. This one's honestly on Chris. He put the work in on this and showed up. That presentation you put together, Chris, super stoked for the next one.
Can't wait, man. Thank you so much, and thanks for joining us on the Film Hang.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Like and subscribe. We'll get this up on the internet soon. We'll see you for the next one. Make sure to follow us up. Peace.